Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. James, sitting in the stuffy car, gazed out the window with admiration past passing floating landscapes were painfully native. The fields of the forest he had dreamed of, doing time in places not so remote. His desire was to ask the driver to stop, run out of the bus, throw off his shoes and barefoot, walk on the grass right across the field, and then fall to the ground, look at the blue sky and listen to the whispering leaves, and breathe deeply, inhaling with his whole chest this fresh, clean air. The 3 years that the court had sentenced the boy to seemed endless. Very often he dreamed of his yard birch with raindrops on the leaves. And what is most interesting, in none of his dreams, he never once saw the one for whom he found himself in such a sad place. And who was she? One of the fleeting girls he'd been clubbing with, a wastrel. And judging by her provocative outfits and behavior, she knew it herself. As a result, nothing good. Of course, it did not end. When James, at her friend's request, went away from her to the bar to get a new portion of alcohol, she was accosted by drunken guys. James, not thinking long, returned and a fight ensued. The guy badly remembered who pushed whom, who hit whom first. Everything happened too fast. One of the attackers fell and never got up again. As it turned out later, the fall was unfortunate. The young man had hit a concrete step with his paddle. Did James regret what he'd done? Yes, of course he did. The first time he was behind bars, every night before he went to bed, he replayed the events of that terrible evening. Only now he realized that it could have been resolved verbally. It wasn't necessary to use his fists. And then the fate of all the people would have been different, and the murdered man would still be alive. But he understood that now, what's done is done, and there was no going back. That girl that James got into a fight over, of course she wasn't going to wait for him. In fact, no one was counting on it. There was nothing serious between them. Did he think she was to blame for what happened? No, he didn't. He had only himself to blame. James sighed heavily. On the other hand, those 3 years were behind him, and now he had a wonderful life ahead of him. Now, of course, he wouldn't get into any more trouble. He's going home. It was very stuffy on the bus. He looked around and noticed that not a single window was open. Then he turned to the girl sitting next to him. "Excuse me, would you mind if I opened the window?" "Yes, of course. Open it a little," the neighbor replied. James immediately reached up and pulled the window sashes down, then looked at the girl again carefully. Pretty flashed through his mind. Only for some reason very sad, almost crying. You can see it in her eyes. "Did something happen to you?" James asked cautiously. "No, nothing's wrong." "Why would you say that?" "Well, because your eyes are wet and it shows." "No, really, I'm fine," she insisted, though her shaky voice gave her away. James wanted to distract her from her sad thoughts, and without expecting it, he blurted out, "I'm going home. 3 years in prison. And today I'm out. You have no idea how happy I am. If I could, I'd hug the whole world." She, interested, looked at the guy, but at the same time cautiously in pity all the money, as if distancing herself from him. "Don't worry," laughed James. "I'm not a maniac. You have nothing to fear. It's just that 3 years ago, I got into a drunken brawl, and a man died because of me. But believe me, I didn't mean it. You see, I've told you everything to the letter. Now it's your turn. What happened to you anyway? My name's James, by the way. What's yours?" "I'm Kathy, but I have a husband, and I'm not dating anyone or anything." "Well, I'm not claiming anything. I just wanted to chat, to pass the time on the road." The guy smiled. "You have no idea how nice it is to talk to a regular person. Besides, if I'm not mistaken, we're countrymen." "That's right. The terminus is in my hometown. You're from there too?" "Yes," Kathy nodded. She looked more closely at her companion. He was a good-looking guy with a good-natured face, and for a moment she thought she'd seen him somewhere before. Could be. It was a small town, and given that they were the same age, they'd probably crossed paths somewhere. And James didn't look like a criminal to me. If he hadn't admitted it himself, Kathy wouldn't have thought of it. Maybe he really just wanted to socialize after such a difficult time in his life. "All right," she replied. "Can we talk about something? How old are you?" "Just turned 25. But where I've been?" They don't celebrate birthdays. That's what Kathy thought. And I was right. We're the same age as them. "So you'd be 22. It was very scary," James exclaimed. I was terrified. But to be honest, at the time, prison time didn't scare me. It was the thought of taking a man's life that terrified me. It took me a very long time to get used to and come to terms with that thought. James was surprised at how easy it was for him to communicate with his new acquaintance. He felt that she understood him like no one else. There was something about the painting that made James feel at ease. They drove the rest of the way over the friendly conversation, and James didn't notice the bus pulling into his hometown and stopping at the bus station. He looked around in confusion. Kathy waved goodbye and disappeared around the corner. It had to be admitted that not much had changed in the time he'd been gone. Even the cab stand was in the same place. Not thinking long, James went in the direction of the cars. It would be a 10-minute drive to his home, and he would finally get to see his father and hug him. In the 3 years he'd been in prison, neither his father nor his brother had written him a single letter. Hate letters. But he didn't resent them. He understood everything. His father was sick before he went to prison. He'd forgotten a lot of things, confused his sons, and Nick wasn't initially thrilled that his brother was a felon. James, I really wanted to believe that his father's health hadn't deteriorated in those 3 years. His dad had been a successful businessman for a long time, had a huge auto parts store in the center of town, and several volumes of business, because there wasn't much competition. Even before James' men's imprisonment, he tried to pass the management to his sons. James had done better than his older brother, and he really hoped that during his absence, Nick hadn't let the store go to waste. When the cab parked in a private lot near the family home, James was speechless at what he saw. A second floor had been added to the house. It wasn't even a house anymore. It was a palace. "Well done, Dad." The boy smiled. "So things were still going so well. And how did you organize the territory?" "New gates have been installed. Now you can see at once that wealthy people live here." They had long ago told his father that they should have done so, but the man did not want to stand out. In front of the neighbors, Nick managed to talk him into it. Pulled the gate. James realized it was locked. He pressed the bell a couple times and waited. But no one was in a hurry to open it for him. Suddenly, a small box next to the bell rang, and from it came his brother's disgruntled voice. "Who?" "Nick. Hello from the Sparrow. Your brother's back." A few minutes later, James looked at his brother and couldn't say a word out of shock. He hadn't even noticed the travel bag sinking from his shoulder and falling to the concrete. "Died when? Why didn't he tell me anything? I had a right to know. Would it have made a difference?" Nick snapped at me. "Maybe they let you out of jail for the funeral." James squatted down and wrapped his arms around his knees. "Dad, how come? Why didn't you wait for me? Why did he die?" James asked his brother. "A heart attack." Apparently, his heart couldn't handle the embarrassment of being the son of a criminal. "Don't tell me," James muttered. "Where's he buried?" "I'm going to go see him now." "Yeah, right now." The boy got up and grabbed his bag from the floor. "I'll just throw my things in my room." "Where are you going to throw them?" his brother asked indignantly. "This isn't your room anymore. The house has been remodeled, in case you hadn't noticed, and your father's death isn't all sad news for you. Before he died, as if he had a premonition, he made a will. Everything belongs to me now, the stores and the house. So I'm sorry, little brother." Nick spread his hands. "Now do you see why your room isn't here? The house is mine." James' heart was tearing apart. Not from being disinherited, but from the thought that he'd disappointed his father so much, just doing it that way. Right after he was arrested, His dad came to see him. The man was completely sane. Apparently, he'd had one of his moments of enlightenment. The last time they met, Dad said, "Son, there's a law for doing things, and I'm not gonna drag you out of here. I realize you didn't do it on purpose, but you killed a man and you must be punished for it, so you can feel the weight of what you've done. But remember, no matter what, you're my son, and I love you very much. If they let me, I will definitely come to visit you in prison. I will be very much looking forward to your release." These words did not come as a surprise to James. He had always known that his father was a fair and honest man, but despite the fact that James was the favorite in the family, and this was noticed by many people, he would never help him in such a situation. The character wasn't right, and James did not understand why his father did not come to see him. The guy decided that his health did not allow, and the reason turned out to be something else entirely. "Fine, let the house be yours, if that makes you feel better," James muttered, "but can you take me in for a while? I'll need a corner until I can get a place to live." Nick pointed to an inconspicuous door under the stairs. "That's where I put all your stuff. But I'm telling you, you've got a month to do everything. If you don't find a place to live and get a job during that time, you'll go to live on the street, and I'm not going to babysit you." That's quite a month. I didn't expect that kind of generosity. James grinned. "A month is a month. Tell me where Dad's buried." Suddenly, the front door opened and Kathy, the one James had met a few hours earlier, walked in. "No show, no sharing at last," Nick shouted. "We agreed you'd go one day, but I called and warned you that I couldn't get the documents so quickly," she mumbled, not taking her eyes off James. "Yeah, is that my problem or what? Who do you think should watch the kid all this time? You'd think I'd have nothing to do. Good mom left her kid for almost 24 hours and doesn't give a shit." Nick noticed that his wife was keeping an eye on his brother. "Yes, by the way, this is my brother released from a place not so remote. But don't worry, he won't be here long." How he got free, Kathy wondered. "But you told me." "Nobody cares what I told you. He's here, period." Nick interrupted her. Kathy looked at James in such a belittling way that he immediately understood. No need to mention that they knew each other. Nick might see it that way. Isis smiled tiredly at James. "Honestly, I don't know what to call you, but it's definitely nice to meet you. Well, I gotta go. I wanted to visit my father." James went to the room Nick had given him. It had been a closet, but now all of James's things had been thrown in there. There was only a couch and a small platinum cabinet where his things hung. It should be noted that before his imprisonment, James had spared no money for clothes, and now he was glad that his brother had kept it all and not given it away to the homeless out of spite. James set his bag by the door and sank down on the sofa by the table. It was hard to accept the loss of his father because he had been in such a hurry to see him. "Oh, Nick, why didn't you tell me?" He could hear the swearing between his brother and his wife. Though it was hardly swearing either, it was mostly Nick. Kathy was trying to justify herself. "I told you to go watch the baby. Mother talk. I gotta go run some errands." And a couple seconds later, James heard the front door slam loudly. Kathy climbed the stairs to the second floor. "To the baby. So Nick has a son, and I have a nephew," pondered James. "It's only been 3 years. How much had changed?" James changed his clothes and was about to leave, but realized that Nick hadn't told him where his father was buried. Then the guy left the room and went up to the second floor. Not knowing which door to enter, he shouted loudly, "Kathy, where are you?" "I am here invited," Anna replied. James entered the room and immediately realized that it was the nursery. The surroundings spoke for themselves. When he saw the baby Kathy was holding, he gasped in surprise. He looked so much like his late grandfather. "Hello, tribe." James smiled, keeping a surprised look on the boy's face. "And what is your name?" "Kevin," answered Kathy, "and we recently turned a year old." "James, I wanted to thank you and ask you to keep our acquaintance a secret. Nick would be very unhappy if he found out." Yeah, I get it. I get it, the guy said. Of course I won't. Can I support my nephew? Has anyone ever told you he looks like our dad? A lot. Yes, Nick said. At the time of your dad's death, we were just dating, so I hadn't really seen him. Nick, I didn't tell you much, and to be honest, I didn't see you that way. He made it sound like you were a bloodthirsty killer with a lot of time to sit around. So when we talked on the bus, it didn't occur to me that you were my husband's brother. Although, looking at your face, I knew you definitely reminded me of someone. I'm sorry, but I always say what I think. Kathy was making excuses again, but James didn't hear her. He was preoccupied with his nephew. Then the girl explained where their father was buried. And coming to the cemetery, James sat at the grave for a very long time, almost 3 hours whispering the same phrase. I'm sorry, Dad, I'm sorry. He got home late. Nick would rather have gone to bed already. So when his disgruntled brother opened the gate for him, he immediately shoved a set of keys into his hands. It won't take long, he muttered. And don't take too long to find a job. In the morning, James decided that he would go straight to look for a job, but he didn't even notice how his feet brought him to a familiar store. This is where he spent his childhood and youth, helping his father. Of course, today the store looked very different from what it had been in his father's time. It used to be a small building, but now it was a huge one-story building with glass windows, a huge sign with a ticker, and an inflatable figure next to it called out "Shopper" appealingly. The store's staff had changed completely. James didn't recognize anyone, but the guy didn't give up hope of finding one person. And here a smile lit up his face. "Stephen, James, you're back," sincerely rejoiced an elderly man. He came up to the boy and hugged him tightly. "Oh, James, I couldn't wait for you, Father." Stephen was an old friend of James's father. As soon as the store started to grow and the need for extra hands arose, Stephen was the first to be hired. "Let's go," the man nodded. "Toward the back. We'll have a chat. Tell me about your misadventures." "Yes, tell me about your misadventures." "You don't have much to tell," James replied. As soon as they crossed the threshold of the back room, "Stephen, is it true that my father died for me? That I am already weak of heart? I couldn't take the shame. Nick told me so." "What are you talking about?" "It never occurred to me to shame you. Everybody can make mistakes. We talked to him about your situation many times, and he kept saying, if he did something wrong, let him serve his sentence. When he's released, I'll take him straight to work. And when he found out about the will, I was very surprised. I don't know why he signed it over to Nick, though he was a little slow on the uptake then." "James, the disease progressed." After a while, Stephen glanced at his watch. "Hurry up," James clarified. "Nick is a very strict boss," he replied. "We now have a system of fines, including for absenteeism. You'd better come to me in the evening. We'll have a quiet cup of tea and chat." "Okay," smiled the guy. "I also basically have to go. I still need to look for a job." "What's there to look for?" "Your brother needs a driver. Who knows the specifics of the job better than you? We still have the same suppliers, and you know them well. I think this is the right place for you." Suddenly, the door to the back room opened, and Nick walked in with a wide, heavy stride. "Stephen, how long are you going to be out of work? What do you want here?" Nick looked at his brother unhappily. "Yeah, I found out you're looking for a driver. Come to get a job. You'll take it." "Of course not. I already have a suitable candidate." "Nick, don't anger God by not turning your brother down. You couldn't find a better man for the job." Standing up for James, Stephen. Nick frowned even more and through his teeth muttered, "All right, I'll take it. But I'm warning you, James. Don't poke your nose into the store management. You're just the driver now. Don't forget that." "Not the factories. I won't forget," grinned my brother. "I can get to work right now. Just show me my transportation. And where do I get the accompanying documents?" James worked diligently, as promised, and tried not to get involved in the store. However, when he realized how his brother was doing business, He came to the conclusion that the store was heading for big losses. The first thing James noticed was the overpricing. By doing so, Nick was turning away many regular customers. And here you do not have to be very smart to realize that the store does not bring in the same percentage of profit. But those weren't the only mistakes, and all of this James could bring to his brother's attention. He was well aware that no one would listen to him and would only freak out. Nick was already walking into eternity with a disgruntled face. Returning in the evenings from work, James cooked his own dinner because he was immediately labeled the position here is not catering, and no one has neither time nor desire to cook for you. So you're on your own. Sometimes in the room, James found a container with food. This Kalina secretly left it from her husband. But in general, the atmosphere in this family was certainly unhealthy. The very first minutes of being here, James realized that Nick treated Kathy like property. He was a real tyrant husband. His brother's wife was never seen or heard from. She moved around the house like a shadow. The son mostly didn't cry in his father's presence either. But if he did, Nick screamed like a madman. How many times have I told you to watch the baby better? How much of a neglectful mother are you? It never ceases to amaze me. In my own house, no peace. From time to time, Nick didn't sleep at home. On such days, he would call to warn me about a business trip that he needed to get out of town right away. Kathy and James loved such evenings because they could talk until late at night. They were very easy together. They chatted about everything but one thing. The woman didn't like the subject, but James still insisted. I really want to understand the reasons why you let yourself be treated this way. You're a smart, beautiful woman, and you deserve better. Can't you just put him in his place once? To make him realize he can't do that. Yeah, tell him you're gonna file for divorce eventually. You just don't understand. Kathy shook her head. I should probably go to bed. It's late. It was like this all the time. Eventually, she'd take her son and go back to her place. And one time, James had said something that made him want to punch himself in the mouth. It's a strange business trip for Nick, isn't it? I wonder where he goes. Yeah, nowhere, Kathy exclaimed. With his mistress, he doesn't even leave the city limits. And you are so calmly informing me about it. Stunned James. How long have you known about his mistress? Of course I knew about his mistress first, and I knew about that too. I'm not an idiot, but now I don't understand you. Why do you live with him? Explain. He's my brother, of course, but you're not a stranger. I can't bear to see you humiliated. Get up off your knees and show some character. Walk away from him and believe me, he'll come crawling back for you. When he sees you're not a spineless creature, he'll change his attitude. Has it never occurred to you yourself? It never crossed my mind. And what's more, I broke up with him. But you know what the point is. I raised my voice at the orphanage. Kathy. But then I stopped talking. That's it. Let's drop the subject. I'm going to bed. She left, and James was left sitting in the kitchen in bewilderment. What does this have to do with the orphanage? The guy thought, orphanages don't leave their husbands. Or is it so important to her material well-being that she is ready to put up with a boorish attitude and change? In all the time she's been living here, James has never once heard Nick speak calmly to Kathy. He was always yelling at her. It was late evening and James was already asleep, tired from the day's long haul of goods. But as sound asleep, he was awakened by some strange sound, like a fall. It was coming from the second floor. James sat up jerkily on the couch and listened. Yes, it was. Nick is yelling at Kathy again. Only this time it wasn't quite the usual. His wife's voice could be heard in addition to his brother's. Kathy's repeating it all over and over again. You can't make out the words. I think, judging by the intonation. Don't please. And then there was another thud like the one that had awakened James a moment ago. An alarming hunch struck the boy. He jumped to his feet and raced to the second floor. James opened the bedroom door without knocking, and his fears were confirmed. Nick swung around to hit Kathy again, and the girl, not even trying to get up off the floor, repeated not to. "Nick, please." James rushed into the room and grabbed Nick's arm. "Are you crazy?" he yelled. Nick yanked his arm out and turned around to face James. "I am crazy. Where are you sticking your nose in? We'll figure it out. This is our family business, and you've been taken in. Be happy." Nick that moment was unlike himself. His eyes narrowed, and the glimmers were of anger. "Get out of our bedroom." "No," James shook his head negatively. "You have to promise not to lay a finger on your wife. What's her fault that she deserves to be treated this way?" "Well, if you're so interested, I picked up this pathetic orphanage from the street. She didn't even have a place to live. She managed to blow the apartment the state gave her. She went to a friend's house. I took her in. I dressed her. Abdul, she should kiss my feet. And she what? She can't take care of a child. The house is messy and dirty, but she's got plenty of time for tail wagging." "Nick, what tail? Are you crazy? Your wife never leaves the house. She sits like a mouse." "Yeah, but when she comes out with me, I see her staring at men. Just give her a free pass. I see you're obsessed with your thoughts, and it's useless to change your mind. But in any case, you have no right to hit her. It doesn't suit you. Divorce. And I'm telling you again, mind your own business. Go to your place. And don't worry, don't touch her. Go to bed." What a bunch of protectors. Nick lay down on the bed, making it clear that he didn't want to talk anymore. James glanced at Kathy, who was rising from her knees, trying to cover herself. She was wearing a nightgown. The girl couldn't even look up at James. The boy realized she was uncomfortable and hurried out of the room. In the morning, James waited until Nikolaev slammed the door behind him, the front door, and the car goes out the gate, before leaving his room. Not finding Kathy on the first floor, he went to the second. The guy decided to talk to the girl by all means. Knocked. He entered without waiting for permission. She only had time to throw on her robe. Without asking anything, he walked quickly over to her and opened her robe with a jerk. "Are you crazy?" shouted Kathy, trying to cover herself. "Believe me, I'm not for the purpose of admiration, but my hunch was confirmed," James said grimly. Kathy's body was covered in bruises. Some were fresh. Some were already nudging. "So he beats you so you can't see anything. Doesn't touch your face. Right? If I just didn't understand why you were around him before, now I'm stumped." "Kathy, do you like this life, or is there some other reason? Where am I going? You've heard I'm an orphan. So, you talk like you're a leper." Surprised James. "No, it's not just that." Kathy couldn't hold back her hysterics any longer and turned to screaming. "You think I haven't tried leaving your brother? I rented an apartment and enjoyed my freedom and a quiet life. But he found me quickly, took my son, and told me I could go away. But he wouldn't give me my son." Kathy was sobbing, spilling out the bitterness and resentment that had long accumulated in her. "I didn't see my son for a week. Every day I wandered around the house like a beaten dog, begging to be let in. And he reveled in the situation. When he finally let me in, he made it clear that if I wanted to divorce him, he would not prevent it. But his son would stay with him. He has a place to live, money, and most importantly, he has connections in the city administration. He opens some offices and doors with his foot. Whose side do you think so-called justice will be on? The situation is definitely not in my favor. An orphan with nothing, not even a job." James was silent when he suggested Kathy dump his brother. He didn't think much of his nephews. He thought he'd definitely stay with his mother. And here we are. Nick had certainly changed. He hadn't been so cruel before, though he was 5 years older than James, but they'd grown up together for years, and the younger man had never noticed such tendencies in his brother. But then James remembered his father's words. He'd told him that Nick should never be given power over people. He hadn't explained why he'd said that, but he must have noticed his eldest son's tendency to violence. That there was nothing to say interrupted his musings. "Kathy, because I'm right. I have no way out. I guess it's fate. All right, James, I got to go feed my son." James never said anything. He went to work, didn't even eat breakfast. All day long, he couldn't get this situation out of his head. It can't go on like this. He had to find a way out of this. The guy still had a week to live in his brother's house. Then he would pay him the first paycheck and hope that James would immediately rent a place and move out. That was basically what James had planned to do. But now he will not live in rented accommodation and will offer his Kathy himself to stay somewhere. At least at Stephen's, the old man won't refuse. And then how to leave his nephew with his mother. You could, of course, tell the court how Nick beats and terrorizes his wife. But will they listen to his words? The words of an ex-con need convincing evidence. The first place to start is to record Kathy's beatings. That document would carry weight in the divorce. And Nick couldn't sleep. Half the night. He rolled over from side to side with Jenna sleeping sweetly beside him. Nick had been visiting her for a long time. He liked spending nights with her, but not much more. She was, so to speak, for the soul. At the beginning of their relationship, he made it clear to his mistress that he wouldn't leave his wife under any circumstances. Then the girl agreed, and now she was blowing her lips on his knee. That's all right. If she continues to be insolent, Nick will be able to put her in her place. In this, he has no equal. Today, Nick, as usual, called his wife and reported about the business trip, but now something was bothering him. And he understood perfectly well that it was his brother living in his house that was bothering him. They were getting too close to his wife. Nick didn't like it. Kathy. He was jealous of every pillar, but she never gave him cause for jealousy. Well, God forbid any man, but God forbid any man to fix his gaze on her. And Nicolay's blood boiled instantly, and at home he took his anger out on her. Tired of insomnia, he sat up in bed and lit the earpiece. "What are you doing up?" Jenna mumbled through her sleep. "I can't sleep. I'm going home. I'm restless." Like home. Jenna opened her eyes immediately. "You told your wife you were out of town, but it's okay. I'm back. I'll surprise you." "Oh, it's up to you," grumbled the disgruntled woman and rolled over to the other side. While Nick drove the car home, he had worked himself up into such a state that he was simply furious. Scenes of his wife and brother together kept popping up in his head. What could they possibly be doing? "You're staying at my house." Shouldn't have traveled yet. The house, he was greeted with peace and quiet. Nick didn't even turn on the lights. He flew to the second floor and opened the bedroom door. Right. How was he right? The bed was empty. Not even sprawled out. He immediately went downstairs and didn't knock. Swung open the door to James' room. Fire at hand, finding a light switch, he turned on the light. But James sat alone. Kathy wasn't here. Nick's heart eased a little. That it was morning. I'd overslept. James woke up, squinting against the bright light. "Kathy, no. In the bedroom. Where is she?" "So why are you asking me where your wife is?" "First of all, stop yelling. Maybe she's in the bathroom. The bed hasn't been assigned. She's not in the house. What did she say last night? Maybe she was going somewhere. I don't know. I didn't see her last night." Nick came home late, went straight to bed, and the house was quiet. And I thought she and her son had gone to bed. Kevin's right. It's not like I wasn't looking in the nursery. Nick ran up the stairs again. The sun had gone out of James's face, and he followed his brother. But it soon became clear that neither Kathy nor his son were in the house, and in addition their belongings were missing. Had she run away? Nick wondered. I don't get it. Life doesn't teach that fool anything. But she's not in prison to escape. James grinned. James grinned, hearing his brother's reasoning. She's just gone. And I think she did the right thing, by the way. I don't know how she lived with you as long as she did. And don't you dare threaten to take Kevin away from her. A child should live with its mother. If you try to take her son away from her, I'll testify against you and tell her you beat her systematically. The fact that I beat her will have to be proved. Nick grinned. And you're meddling again. You don't know anything at all, but you're just standing there being smart. Nobody's going to leave the baby to her. Just like no one's gonna listen to you. She's the one who's all decent and modest now. But you have no idea what a fun life she led before we met. I told you she even blew off the house they gave her after the orphanage. Why am I surprising you? You don't have to answer that. I can see that. Kathy probably didn't tell you about it. Of course, she wouldn't have benefited from it. Now the question is, whose side will this court be on when it comes to her son? And that fool won't repent. I'll develop faster with her myself. I'll take the kid and let her go. James looked at his brother as if he was seeing him for the first time. Nick, you're seriously saying that now? Didn't you do some weird stuff when you were young? We're all sinful. I, for example, remember very well how your father took you away with the police and clearly you weren't vacationing there. And Kathy is a normal person and a caring mother now. She doesn't drink and she doesn't go out. And she cares about her son. Leave him alone. No, Nick was stubborn. We got the whole town on edge. But he's still got that bitch. I'm gonna make her cry. The next day, Nick searched the city in the morning, using everyone he could find. But he couldn't find his wife. She had no friends, and only after 2 days of active search it turned out that she had bought a train ticket to Vladivostok. Nick checked and found out that the girl never reached the final station and got off the train somewhere earlier. But where is unknown. Only now the man realized that this time it was much more serious. Kathy skillfully covered her tracks so that he could never find her. The man returned home angry as hell. And when he saw a satisfied James in the kitchen, cooking dinner, he was even more furious. I don't understand why you're still working here. You got your paycheck for the month. Well, let's get out of here. It's time to get an apartment. Yes, I will, grinned the guy. I'll do it tomorrow. I was just worried about the picture. But now I'm sure you won't be able to find it, so I can move out with a clear conscience. Get out of here, hissed a furious Nick. Get out of here. Right now, I told you. It didn't take James long to find a place to live. Stephen found out that it was time for James to move out from his brother, immediately invited him to stay with him. The house is a big man long ago divorced. The daughter has grown up and lives in another city. And Stephen told James that he would be only for joy if the guy will stay with him. And no money, of course, he will not take from him. James didn't have to be persuaded. Stephen was like family to him. He had grown up in front of the man's eyes. He was already sorting through his things in the spacious room with the large windows. As James pulled the neatly folded t-shirts out of the bag, at the bottom, his fingers came across a quadruple folded piece of paper. What is this? He unfolded the sheet, he thought. It turned out to be a farewell letter from Kathy. James had no time to say goodbye, so had decided to do it this way. In the letter, it was clear from the handwriting that the girl was in a hurry. I've been planning my escape for a long time and preparing for it thoroughly. Remember when we met on the bus? That trip wasn't just for fun. It was one of the elements of preparation. You always asked me why I put up with all this and didn't leave Nick. You just don't know everything about me. After the orphanage, I fell in with some bad company. I drank, smoked. I had a wild life. Yeah, all of that. At the time, I didn't understand what Nick saw in me, why he chose me. Now I realize I was easy to manipulate, given my past, and Nick regularly needs to take out his anger on someone. Well, it's a character trait. I regret my past, of course, but unfortunately, those mistakes can't be undone. Now the whole point of my life is my son, and I can't lose him. Thank you for everything. Such good people in my life met very few. I wish we'd met sooner. But you know, there's something else you should know. Back at the house, I couldn't open up to you about my brother because I'd get caught again. And now I have nothing to fear. Your father signed the will in an inebriated state. He didn't know what he was doing. I know for a fact he didn't plan on leaving you without an inheritance, but his illness progressed more and more each day. And more often than not, he was insane. That's when your brother took advantage. One day he bribed a notary. He was the one who came to our house. So when your father signed the will, he didn't realize what he was doing. But unfortunately, that's not all. When Nick and I were dating, I witnessed a scandal between your father and Nick. As far as I could understand, Dad somehow remembered that he had signed something and demanded to see the papers, but Nick refused. Then Dad said something I'll never forget. "You're never getting my store. I'm leaving all this to James. He's honest and much better than you." Nick then jumped out of the house, followed by Dad showing up. He was holding onto the wall with one hand and his heart with the other. That's when he started having a heart attack. I told Nick that I needed an ambulance, that Dad wasn't feeling well. But he just yelled at me, saying that the old man was just playing pity games, that your father was gone for the night. I'm so sorry, and I should have let you know. It's just that I heard Nick telling you that you were responsible for your dad's death. Don't believe that's a lie. I know for a fact that your father loved you very much and waited for you. Goodbye, James. Maybe we'll see each other again someday. James could not believe his eyes. He read the letter several times, but his brain refused to believe it. It couldn't be true. Nick couldn't have been so cruel to his father. Had he really left him alone? Didn't even call an ambulance. On the other hand, there was no reason not to believe Kathy either. As much as I didn't want to accept this information, but in his heart, James realized that everything written in the letter was the purest truth. Stephen suddenly interrupted the boy's musings by looking into the room. "James, how did you arrange the bedding in the closet on the top shelf? James, can you hear me?" The lad turned to the man and held out a piece of paper. "Read it, please," he asked. Mukina quickly ran his eyes over what was written, then sighed heavily, folded the letter, and looked at James. "What can I tell you? I'm not surprised at all. I told you even then that I didn't quite understand your father's actions. I mean, his actions didn't match his words. It just couldn't be. But I had no proof. It was just a hunch. Now you know the notary. Now we can deal with it. Start. Maybe you'll get something. Just don't drag it out. What's there to deal with? Sam is a classmate of Nick's, if memory serves me correctly. Do you really think he's gonna tell me the whole truth? Yeah, it's my fault. I'll make it up to you." "No, of course not. It's obvious he's in on it and knew it all from the start. But that's not what I'm worried about. I don't need it. It's an inheritance, Stephen. But you could have saved Dad, not left him alone. Then Dad could be alive now. I'll go to Kelly at once and sort it all out." The boy headed resolutely for the door, but Stephen immediately grabbed him by the shoulder. "Don't, James. You'll only make a mess of things. In this state of mind, everything must be done with a fresh head. It's a shame about your father, I agree, but you can't bring him back. But if you go to your brother, you could end up in a fight. And then what? That's right. You'll go back to where you just came from. I'm sick of freedom. He's gonna file a report on you right away. You bet he will. So what do you suggest?" James looked at the men. "Well, first of all, calm down, get a grip. Secondly, take a sick day at work, so you don't cross paths with your brother. Better yet, take care of your inheritance issues. Challenge the will. It'll hurt Nick more, believe me." Tomorrow morning, straight to Sam's, James decided to take his father's advice. And in the morning, just before it opened, he was at the door of the notary's office. He recognized Sam immediately. James wasn't wrong. It was definitely Nick's classmate. And it was obvious from the notary's face that he recognized James too. But as he came closer, Sam smiled a fake smile. "Hi, James. How many years? How many winters? How long have you been out? What brings you here? No foreplay." "Stop, James the notary. I'm thinking about my release. You know everything in detail. You better tell me this. How come my incapacitated father was able to make and sign a will for Nick? And what makes you think that your father was incapacitated at the time of signing?" Sam was surprised. "I personally dealt with the case. I came to your house because your father was ill and could hardly move. The will was also drawn up at home. Well, you know, your father was fully competent at the time, fully aware of his actions. I can attest to that in court. I even have independent witnesses, so everything here is done according to the law. Don't even doubt it. Sam, smirking achidically, stared directly into the eyes of James. Suddenly the latter, unable to stand it, grabbed the notary by the breasts, and with all his might was coming against the brick wall of the building. But the notary only continued to smile. And I see you've missed the zone. I can arrange a repeat trip to places not so remote, but for a longer period. Returning home in the evening, Stephen found James gloomier than a cloud. I take it the result of the meeting with the notary is nil. Is he really Nick's classmate? Yes, nodded James. He himself claims that everything was done according to the law. I went to a lawyer afterwards. I thought, what would he advise me in such a situation? What's the right thing to do? And he told me that there's nothing to be done. You just have to accept it. There's no medical examination, so there's no way to prove he's incompetent, and the rest is just words. And I can't prove that Nick bribed the notary and their witness. Yeah, that's a bit of a stretch, Stephen. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to upset you even more. Your brother called me into his office today and yelled so much he drooled. He already knows you're living with me, but he said he doesn't care. But the fact that you went to the notary and threatened me, I didn't threaten him. James was outraged. It was just a little temper tantrum. James, it's not in your interest to go on a shooting spree. You understand, everything must be done according to the law. No amateurishness. This Sam has already reported everything to Nick. Your brother's furious. You have no idea how he yelled one word. You're fired as of today. Here's your papers. Nick threw them in my face. Told me not to show my face to him again. And my brother, by the way, he said he doesn't have one anymore. Well, that's to be expected. I don't want to see Nick myself. I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself. I was only staying with him for the picture. I was afraid to leave them alone together. And basically, I can say I don't have a brother anymore. You're talking about the law. According to the lawyer, I can't do anything. What are we left with? A notarized document against the word of a felon. That's ridiculous. Yeah, scratching the back of Stephen's head really isn't fun. What are you gonna do next? What I can do, I'm gonna look for another job. I can't be a bum sitting on your ass, but that's where I can help you. A man exclaimed. I recently met a friend of my daughter. I do not remember exactly what her job title is, but I know that she delivers medicines to pharmacies. Well, she needs a driver because she can't drive. And the one from the other day quit. The only inconvenience is having to drive all over town. Well, I don't think that's gonna be a problem for you. So you'll do it? Yeah, sure, I'm in, James exclaimed. And in a couple of days he met Lucy and started his new job. Lucy turned out to be a cheerful girl with a short haircut and all the time tried to talk, silent on the first James. And the guy was not up to fun. He did not let go of heavy thoughts about his father and his mean brother. But in the end, James and Lucy became friends. To be honest, Nick was having a hard time with it, too. As soon as his girlfriend found out his wife had left him, she was at his door 2 hours later with her things, arriving without a call, just putting the man before the fact. I wonder what you expected. You're free now, which means there's nothing stopping us from being together. Your wife left you. I mean, sleeping with me means you're right there, but living together, we'll think about it. No, my dear, it won't work that way. Jenna, my wife is not gone forever. It's temporary. As soon as I carry her, I'll bring her back here. To what end? Exclaimed an indignant Jenna. She's made it clear to you that she doesn't want to live with you. Why would you force someone to do that? Especially since you're not alone. You have me, and I love you very much. Nick gritted his teeth like a toothache. He knew perfectly well what exactly Jenna loves: money. That's the only love she had. Jenna, we have a son in common, And in case you haven't forgotten, he continued to insist on his point. And my son has to live only with me. I will never give up on him. Okay, immediately agreed the girl's son. Take the son and file for divorce. What's the problem? Aren't you going to raise him? What's wrong with that? Yes, I don't want my son to be brought up by a stranger's woman, no matter how she is, still a mother. So in your eyes, I'm a strange woman. That depends. Not to me, but to Kevin, yes. Okay, there's no point in arguing. That's what we'll do. You're here for now. Since the woman's here, the house still needs cleaning, eating, cooking. I don't mind. But as soon as I get my family back, you can't be here. And without any scandals or hysterics. Is that okay with you? No, it's not okay with Jenna's pouty lips. But I'll stay. Maybe I'll get lucky and you'll never find them. She's done a lot of planning for her escape. You can tell. Nick decided not to tell Jenna that he was currently in the process of divorcing Kathy. His plan had long been to divorce his wife officially and determine his son's place of residence with him. He had even paid all the right people so that there would be no problems. Soon, very soon, all the documents were to be in his hands, and that's when he'll find the picture from under the ground. He would get this scum and take away his son not just for nothing, but on the basis of the relevant documents. He knew perfectly well that his wife couldn't do without her son. And under such circumstances, she herself will come to him on her knees and will endure all the humiliation. He wouldn't let her come back right away. He planned to torture her for a long time to make her realize what a lowlife she is. But then, of course, he would bring her back, because Kathy was the one he saw as his wife, and certainly not Jenna. The latter has a family, and they could stand up for her daughter. And Jenna had a temper of her own. Nick was a little afraid of her himself. He knew if he laid a finger on her, she'd pull your hair out. Jenna was definitely not replaceable to the new Kathy. So he's looking for a wife, no matter what, especially since he already knows the train number and the carriage she left in. So he planned to talk to the conductor personally. Maybe he could find out at which station she got off. The man glanced nervously at his watch. Soon this very train will be passing through town, and the very conductor is on shift. So he had to get to the station right away. Good job, he muttered. Get dressed. But don't forget, it's only temporary. After these words, Nick flew out of the house and jumped into the car and drove in the direction of the station. There was still a lot of time before the train arrived, but his patience had run out. Like a hunter, he followed the trail of the beast. He knew he could never live in peace. He had not found his wife. The guide looked at the man glumly and muttered, "Well, actually, I've already answered all the questions. I remember her. She was still with child. But what station did she get off at? I can't tell you. I didn't see her. Well, what if you try?" And Nick carefully put the 5,000th bill into his jacket pocket. The conductor carefully watched his movements and then said, "But you'd say it's important. Let me think about it. I'm afraid of being wrong, of course. But there are two possibilities. Either in Nellie she's gone off, or she's a bogra. No, wait, 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 wait. Kenya. It's a small town. Why didn't I see her get off? I opened the car door and went into the next car for a few minutes, for God's sake. And when the train started 2 hours later, I noticed the passenger was missing. And in the meantime, there were no other stops." Nice grin, Nick. "Thank you. You have no idea how much you've helped me." A few days later, James came home from work in the morning because he'd been traveling long distance and had been on the road all night, and found Stephen in a bad mood. He was glum and silent. "Had something happened?" James asked. "Yes. I don't even know how to tell you this, James." The man was silent for a moment. He sighed heavily, and Nick continued. "Your brother's been out of town for a couple days, and he came back last night with Kevin. And Kathy." James was worried. "She's here too." "That's the thing, she didn't. He came into the store last night, glowing with pride. He was telling everyone that he got his son back. He shouldn't have to live with a negligent mother. The boy needs a man's education. James' fatigue was gone. What to do? He pondered aloud. Kalinka would never give his son to him herself. We must go to Kelly. What do you think, Stephen? Is he still at home or already at work? But what work? Who's he going to leave his child with? Probably at home. But I'm going to my brother's. Take your time, James. It's none of your business. Koken's son and his wife. You're powerless in this situation. You can't help, but you'll get into trouble. The older man tried to stop him, but the guy only waved his hand at his words. He drove up to the house just as Nick was driving the cars out of the garage. What about Kathy? Where is she? Shouted James on the run, ignoring his older brother, who tried his best to block his way into the house. But James managed to push him away and flew inside, running into the kitchen. He saw a young stranger with very bright, even a little vulgar makeup, trying to feed porridge to Kevin. But the boy was crying, drinking food, and calling for his mom. Who are you? She stared at the unknown guest. That's my brother. Nick's disgruntled voice was heard behind her back. Don't worry, he's leaving now. Answer me, where's Kathy? James turned to his brother. How the hell should I know? Yesterday she was in a small town called Kenneth. Where is she today? God only knows, and I don't really care about her, you know. I wanted a son, and as you can see, I got him back. What right did you have to take a child from its mother? Legally, just so you know, while that lunatic was hiding from me, I divorced her, and the court determined the son's place of residence with his father. And I'm the father, so that makes Kathy a criminal. She kidnapped my child from me. How could you do such a thing? James couldn't believe his own ears. I'm amazed at how despicable you are. Where did you get all this from? Kathy is a wonderful mother and doesn't deserve to be treated like this. That's from your point of view. But the court agrees with me that Kathy is a disgusting mother with a past like that. Leave her past alone, James shouted. I repeat, we are all sinners, you included. What matters is what we are today. Your wife's ex-wife is a good person now too. Or do you think he's the one pointing his finger at Jenna can replace her as a mother? That it's a worthy option. Actually, I hear everything. Tried to resent Jenna squeamishly swiping the remnants of porridge from the bright manicure. But the man did not even pay attention to her, continuing to argue. I still haven't heard. Where's Kathy? What did you do to her? You mean you just took your son and left her in another town like nothing happened? Yeah, I wouldn't believe that for the life of me. You beat her up again. How many times have I told you to mind your own business? Well, don't worry. Soon your little picture will come crawling back to me begging for forgiveness. And I didn't even have to hit her to do it. Now get out of my house and don't make me call the police. And without the police, I'll be kicked out. James, clenching his fists, slowly approached his brother. Nick watched him warily and immediately slipped his hand into his pocket, frantically fumbling for his cell phone. Come on, relax, the guy grinned. I'm not going to get my hands dirty. I'm leaving. But I warn you, if Kathy doesn't show up soon, I'll be back. And that's when you'll be in trouble. But Kathy showed up that afternoon, close to evening, disengaged, with black circles under her eyes. The girl walked slowly toward the more familiar gate. After standing for a moment, she pressed the bell button with a shaky hand. James watched all of this, not far away in the work car that his boss allowed him to keep. He was sure that when she returned to town, the first thing she would do would be to see where her son was. And the guy wasn't wrong. But when he saw Nick open the gate, he pushed his wife away. His hands clenched into fists of their own accord. Kathy staggered, but managed to stay on her feet. What exactly Nick had yelled in her face, James hadn't heard. Yeah, it didn't matter. So the whole situation was clear. Then he defiantly slammed the gate in her face, and the girl remained standing outside the gate with her hands over her face. Her whole body shook with sobs. James started the car and cautiously approached Kathy. Get in, he said, opening the passenger door. "He won't let you in the house anyway. There's no point in standing here. Get in," I said. The girl obediently sat down in the cabin, and again emotions took over, jabbing at his shoulder. She burst into tears again. How did he manage to find us? I was sure I had carefully concealed everything. The look in her eyes, full of despair and longing, made James's heart ache. "He beat you." "No, not really, but it doesn't matter now. I've seen the paperwork, James. He should have Kevin now. I no longer have rights to my son. I can only see him on weekends and only in front of Nick. How am I supposed to live? I don't know what to do." "Don't worry. We'll find a way out," mumbled James. "Right now, you need to calm down and come to your senses. I'll take you to a very nice man, Stephen. I live in his house, and I think there's room for you there." Meanwhile, on the second floor of the huge house, Nick opened the blinds a little. He watched the couple in the car with hatred. He saw that James was driving, who was currently hugging his wife, albeit his ex-wife. Nick wasn't going to break up with her for a second. Right now, he needed her to feel her petty nature. He would make her grovel for a long time before he would allow her to be reunited with her son. He must teach that ungrateful wench a lesson. Nick's fists even itched with anticipation. The car started abruptly and was soon out of sight. I wondered where my brother was taking my wife. But no, this wasn't how it was supposed to be. Nick had planned to keep his wife under the gate all night. That's when Jenna quietly entered the room. "What's next?" she said loudly. "Your wife showed up. How are we going to live? I really want to believe that you don't have the sense to welcome her with open arms. And I'm the mistress of this house now. I don't want to see your painting here. Your child is in my care, so don't even think about letting her in here. Are you trying to dictate terms to me?" "Nick, if memory serves, the day you showed up uninvited, if anything, with your stuff, I warned you you were here on loan. And if you tell me what to do, you're out of here in a heartbeat." "Oh, really?" Bright eyes. "Jenna, calm down and don't yell at me. I already told my parents we're living together now, and I'm not gonna embarrass myself in front of them. Married and divorced. You can forget about her. If you let her in here again, I'll give her a beating so bad she'll forget she ever came here. Don't you dare," yelled Nick. "She has to come here and humiliate herself. That's part of my plan, and it's the part that gives me the most pleasure. No one was going to let her in the house now. And by the way, she can see her son, but only in my presence." In the morning, James woke up to an incomprehensible noise coming from downstairs. It seemed that there were guests at home early in the morning. But who could it be? He jumped up and started to get dressed, but he didn't have time to go out. Stephen came into the room, looking alarmed, to say the least. "James, there are policemen downstairs looking for the basket." "For what purpose? And why would they be looking for it in the next room? And why don't the police understand anything?" Stephen shifted from foot to foot, and it was obvious from his face that he wanted to say something else but couldn't find the words. "You're probably better than that, James. The news isn't good. Nick. Anyway, his body was discovered late last night. They say he was murdered, and well, they suspect a picture of the deed. Like murdered. It can't be." But there was no time for James to get an answer. 2 policemen entered the room. They quickly looked around the room, and one of them pronounced, "When was the last time you saw?" James still sat down on the bed because his legs refused to hold him. And without answering the question of the police, he asked them a counter question. "What about Nick?" "You don't know. Someone stabbed him with a sharp object last night. The stabbing went straight through the heart, and we suspect your sister-in-law." "Yes, James, have you been slow to make sense of what the cops said?" "Not anymore. Whatever it was, his brother was the only person he had in this world, and James would never wish him dead under any circumstances, not even after learning that he was indirectly responsible for his father's death." The policeman kept asking questions, but James heard them as if through absorbent cotton. Kathy looked at the policeman in surprise. "Why her?" What makes you think Kathy is guilty? I know she had nothing to do with it. We came here together. She said she was tired and went to bed early last night. And have you seen her since? The policeman asked. We were just in her room. The bed was taken. Apparently, the girl never slept there. But that's no reason to suspect her of murder. So she couldn't sleep. So what? By the way, the brother wasn't living alone lately. His roommate, Jenna. Have you interviewed her? What did she say? Jenna. At her mom's house since yesterday afternoon. Her mom wasn't feeling well, so she went there. She spent the night at her parents' place too. But that's still no reason to suspect Kathy. Why her? James wouldn't let it go. Then I'm more likely to be the killer. First of all, my brother and I were fighting over the inheritance, and secondly, I was already in jail. You're right, agreed the policeman, and we'd certainly consider you for the role of murderer. Don't worry. But only if it weren't for one thing. Nick's neighbor, an elderly woman who suffers from insomnia, saw Kathy running out of the house in the morning with a baby in his arms. The second policeman, who until that moment had been silently shifting from foot to foot, suddenly uttered, addressing his partner, "Listen, enough. It's already clear that the girl is not here. We need to declare an interception plan before she skips town." The cops left, and James remained sitting on the bed, staring at one point. Stephen sat down beside him and handed him a mug of hot tea. "Have a drink, James. Have a drink. Come to your senses. I know it's hard to realize that Nick is gone, but life goes on." James clutched the cup of tea tightly in his hands, ignoring the fact that it was very hot. "I can't accept it. Stephen, first Dad, now Nick. Really, I didn't recognize my brother the last few days. He changed a lot during my absence. I never could get through to him. Maybe I should have just sat down and had a heart-to-heart talk. Maybe then he'd be back to his old self. James, has Nick always been like this? And did your father see it? I'm not condoning the picture, but it's his own fault for bringing it to this state. The girl was desperate and didn't realize what she was doing. He just gave her no choice. Do you believe the picture killed him too?" James looked at his companion in surprise. "James, did you hear the cops? They said that the neighbor saw Kathy running with Kevin in her arms. Because she went to bed in the evening doesn't explain anything. It's not like we can say she was there till morning. She could have left the house quietly at any time. Where do you think she'd go? Yeah, to her sons, of course. And then it all worked out so well. And she wasn't home either. They probably started fighting again. Maybe your brother even hit her. She couldn't take it anymore. Grabbed the first thing she could get her hands on. The police still haven't figured out what was used to stab her. The murder weapon wasn't found at the scene. I think it's more than obvious, James. I understand that you like Kathy. I like her too. She's a very nice girl. But you see, anyone, even the kindest, most positive person, can be driven insane. Especially if the bargaining chip is your kid. Kathy will probably go on the run again, and you need to organize your brother's funeral. There's no one else to do it. A funeral. I don't understand, James asked. He still couldn't come to his senses. He wished that everything that had happened had been a dream, just a nightmare. He woke up and it would all be over. But there was no waking up. His brother was gone. Kathy was gone again. Did he love her? Yes, now he could admit it to himself. He was willing to go through all the hardships with her and fight for Kevin. James had always imagined how great it would be for the three of them, him, Kathy, and Kevin. But now it was all empty. He stood up, setting the cup of tea on the nightstand that was already there. The boy never touched it. Then slowly turned to Stephen. You're right. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. I just don't agree with you about the painting. Well, she couldn't have taken her brother's life. I really want her and Kevin not to get caught. At least not until they figure out who the real killer is. You and I know how my brother did business, so she wasn't the only one who might have wanted him dead. But a few hours later, word got out that Kathy and the baby had been found. caught at the train station as she was about to board the train. Seeing a police squad heading in her direction, she threw her arms around her son, and thus confirming her guilt in the eyes of the police. Nick's funeral was crowded. Many people in town knew him, but it wasn't just acquaintances who came. It wasn't a big town, and people liked to gossip. And this was a big deal. A big store owner was murdered in his own house. And who did it? His wife. His own wife. Really, it's all the talk of the town. Jenna sobbed the loudest, with a beautifully tied black silk scarf on her head. And when the coffin began to be lowered into the grave, she went up to James and squeezed his wrist to the point of pain and whispered. But even looking at it, the picture, thank God, she was captured. Let them lock her up for a long time. People like that shouldn't be out of jail at all. She ruined our whole lives with that knee. And we were going to get married. He even asked me to marry him the other day. So now I'm practically his lawfully wedded wife. So what's the bottom line? The Hares, if I'm not mistaken, are you and his son. As the conversation progressed, Jenna's tone changed at the end. People who saw Nick off to his last journey began to involuntarily listen, wanting to catch the essence of the conversation of the relatives of the deceased. Those who were particularly curious even tried to get closer. But James pulled her back. Let's leave the inheritance talk for later. I haven't thought about it yet. No, of course you haven't. He grinned evilly at Jenna, straight up innocent sheep. Dab and her brother hated each other. Kathy was a murderer. So the only one who was close to Nick and really loved him. That's me. And I'm gonna be out of business because we didn't get the damn stamps at the registry office. Jenna's tears dried immediately, and there was only a greedy light in her eyes. James couldn't help but wonder. He hadn't known her until now, but it took him a few minutes to realize that she and Nick were worthy of each other. Her brother certainly wouldn't dare raise his hand at her. That would probably backfire too. James took a close look at her face, though. Despite the fact that it was strong, up close, it was obvious that the plump lower lips was not a gift of nature, but the result of a blow. Consequently, things between her and Nick were not all that smooth as she was trying to present here. It had been rough too. Even later, in the dining room, acquaintances began to approach James with expressions of condolence. James nodded. Look, what a wonderful man his brother had been. But it was flattering. Lying only made him feel disgusted. All he saw in his eyes sad them only curiosity. They were genuinely interested in who would get all the stores now. So they came up to shake James' hand. Although a few days ago, many of them, having met James on the street, would not even say hello to the former criminal. At some point, the guy felt like he might explode. He wanted so badly to yell, "Enough." Nick was not a saintly, kind-hearted man. What are you all saying? And you know it. And Kathy is not a brutal murderer who's in jail. Stephen had an eagle eye on James, sensed his mood. The man was there instantly. He put a hand on the guy's shoulder and said, "Well, I guess it's time to sit down at the tables. Let's remember Nick." And after dinner, James went over to Stephen's. "Would you mind if I stayed with you for a while?" He asked the man. "I can't stay in a house where first my father died, and then my brother was gone." "Yes, of course," Stephen smiled. "Of course, you can stay here permanently, but you'll still have to deal with the house. If you can't live there, you can sell it." "Stephen, I'm in no condition to talk about this right now. I'm thinking about the painting. Do you think they'll let me talk to her? I'd like to ask her myself how it all came about." "Well, why not?" The man shrugged. "Dating. It's not illegal. We could try to get a meeting. We just need to find a lawyer." James managed to get a date with Kathy after a few days. And there he was, sitting across from this pale girl. And the first thing he heard from her was, "James, I didn't do it. I didn't kill Nick." He exhaled. He believed her right away. Well, Kathy couldn't lie like that. Looking him in the eye, she wasn't like that. Then how did all this happen? "Kathy, you went to your room last night, and ended up at my brother's. Why did you even go to his place at night? Not at night. It was morning, but very early. I couldn't sleep. So I decided to go to Nick's to wait for him to leave for work. I wanted to beg him to let me see Kevin for at least 10 minutes. The buses weren't running yet, so I walked. And when I got to the house, I saw the gate was open. So I went in. And there, well, I ran into Nick. He was lying on the first floor with his arms spread out. There was no one else in the house. What do you think I should have done? I was confused at first, but then I ran into the nursery, grabbed Kevin out of his crib, and ran. At first, I just wanted to go back to the Stephen house. Yeah, I did. I realize now that I should have called the police right there in the house. But I'm telling you, I was scared out of my mind. I realized later, when I was running away with Kevin, that I could be blamed for everything. So I ran to the train station. So what are you saying? James got agitated. The murder was committed in the evening, and you came to the house in the morning. Did you tell the coroner about this? What's the reason you're still here? Why aren't they letting you go? James, are you really that naive, or are you just pretending to be? Who's gonna believe me now? There's too much against me. Besides, Nick and I were divorced, and I already tried to run away from him with my son. There are plenty of witnesses who can confirm our scandals outside the house. Everyone knows I wanted to take the baby for myself. I don't think my innocence can be proven anymore. Is that wrong? James exclaimed. Don't worry. I'll find a good lawyer and get you out of here. Kalina stared intently into James's eyes. Do you trust me? I don't care about anyone around me, but it's important that you believe me. I do, and I'll do my best to help. Thank you, James. You don't have to thank me. I was in the same position myself once, but unlike you, I did take a man's life, and you never once condemned me for it. Do you remember? James tilted his head, thought for a moment, and then suddenly said, but on the other hand, Karen, even if you had really killed Nick, I'd still be on your side. I saw with my own eyes how he treated you, and I realized that you could have just been defending yourself. No one can understand you better than me. James interrupted Kathy's boyfriend. Our time is coming to an end. I'm being led now, and I won't have time to ask you for the most important thing. If the situation is not resolved in my favor, and I am still accused of this murder, I will not let my nephew grow up in an orphanage. Who better than me to know how bad it is out there? It's even worse if they take custody of him, just because he's the heir. Take my son with you. I can trust you because I know you love him, and he'll be fine with you. It's too soon to talk about that. I believe we can prove our innocence. You're not going to jail. Remember what time you left the house. And the way you walked home. Nick, there's no way anyone but your neighbors saw you. I'll take the same streets and ask all the tenants to prove enough that you went there in the morning and not in the evening, when your brother was killed. Stephen looked at James with sympathy. James, look, you've been all over the place. You don't even have time to eat. How many times? Don't you realize you won't find any witnesses? And if you do, they won't be in Kathy's favor. But the kid just kept shaking his head. There must be someone who saw her that morning. She didn't go in the morning. She left in the evening. You can't see that she's lying, and I can understand it. That girl can't confess to you that she killed your brother. She doesn't want to do time. But the picture's coming together nicely. Kalina came to see her son. Nick raised his hand to her again. So she poked her ex-husband with whatever she could get her hands on. No, it wasn't anything. We already know it was sewing scissors. Again, where those scissors were kept, no stranger could have known. They were only used by Kathy before the divorce. That's another fat point against her. No, James moved his eyebrows stubbornly. Regardless, he continued to run the streets. He'd already avoided the entire route Kathy had taken to get to her ex-husband's house that morning, if her words were to be believed. James knocked on houses, questioned people in examining the recorders installed on cars parked that morning that the girl might have gotten into. But it was all in vain. Every night Stephen argued that Kathy was lying and that she was guilty. And James slowly began to doubt her innocence. Then one day he met a young boy who lived not far from Nick's house. When he saw the picture of the painting, he looked at it for a long time and then said, "I think I saw it, but not in the morning. She came in the evening. We were just with the guys going for a ride, and I went out of the house. And I think this girl was heading that way." The kid waved his hand in the direction of Nick's house. "But she looked a lot like her, although I'm not 100% sure." And that's when a seed of doubt, of apprehension began to sprout in the boy's heart. Was Kathy lying to him? Maybe Stephen is right, and it's hard for her to admit to James that she killed his brother. But he told her he'd be on her side anyway. He wouldn't convict. James found a good lawyer who quoted a price that made the guy's eyes pop. All the savings that the guy managed to save during his working life. He did not have enough and had to borrow in Stephen. After all, the inheritance. James still hadn't come into his inheritance. The lawyer tried his best. On the eve of the trial, James met with him. "You know, James, I'll be honest with you. I regret taking this case because it's a failure. There's not a single defense witness. I mean, you've tried so hard, but you haven't found one. Most likely Kathy is guilty, and the court will easily prove it. There's too much against the girl. What if there is a witness?" James exclaimed. "What if that witness is me saying I spent the whole night with Kathy? I wouldn't advise it." The lawyer gave James a piercing look. "I wouldn't advise you to do that. It's too late to make a statement like that. No one will believe you now. I wish they had. And now Kathy's almost proven guilty, which means you'll be perjuring yourself on the stand. And given your past, I don't think you want to do that. You were punished for what you did and didn't believe, despite your dead father's money. And in Kathy's case, there were more circumstances from Mahler. She won from the orphanage. So there was intent. The prosecutor would push for it and ask for the maximum sentence for the girl." James had goosebumps running up and down his spine. "Maximum? How much?" "Well, under this article, it's 16 years. Well, I don't think she'll get the maximum." James' lawyer hastened to reassure James, seeing the terror in his eyes. "And I'll try to get it reduced." At the trial, Kathy cried the whole time. The prosecutor shouted, making the girl look like a calculated murderer of a respected citizen of the city. Unexpectedly for James, Jen appeared as a witness for the prosecution. She diligently recounted how Kathy wiped out near her and Nick's house every night, how she had stolen the baby once before and run away with it to another town, and how Nick had tried his best to keep her out of the house because he was afraid she might hurt them all. After all, she had a very hot temper. This is where James' patience broke, and he shouted from his seat that it was a lie. Kathy, on the other hand, is a calm and balanced person, and the violent character was possessed by the murdered man himself, who repeatedly raised his hand against his wife. The judge reprimanded James, and then Kathy's past came up. No matter how hard he tried, Kathy's lawyer gave him 10 years. Upon hearing the sentence, the girl burst into tears. As she was led away from the courtroom under escort, she kept turning her head to look for James, and when she found him, she screamed, "James, take Kevin. I beg you, and take Kevin for yourself." The guy was almost crying as he left the courtroom. "You weren't much help, were you?" he said reproachfully to the lawyer. "Believe me, I did everything I could," he said. "If it wasn't for me, the girls would have given even more." "We'll appeal." Stephen, who knew James' home, was not surprised to hear about the sentence. "Honestly, I thought it'd be less. What are you gonna do next? You're gonna leave it as it is?" "No, of course, my lawyer, and I will appeal. But we have a bigger problem right now. Kevin's been placed in an orphanage, and Kathy's been asking me to take my nephew for myself. Do you think that's possible?" Stephen was surprised. "The little one's a year and a half old. How are you gonna handle a kid that small? What do you even know about babies? That's one thing. And secondly, what makes you think they'll give it to you? What's the problem? I'm a relative. Yeah, a relative with a very interesting background and no marriage. I'd be happy to be wrong. But first of all, why don't you go to the child welfare office and see how much chance you have in this case? I'm sure there will be plenty of people wanting custody of Kevin. And you know the reason as well as I do. James rushed straight to the child welfare office. Once again, Stephen was right. There was very little chance that Kevin would be given to James, and the primary reason for the refusal was his criminal record. If the guy had at least been married, that would be a whole different conversation. So what's the problem? Well, get married, Stephen smiled, and then he faltered when he saw the gleam in James's eyes. If anything, I was kidding. Or do you have a fiancé in mind? Why would I have a fiancé? I mean, you could have a sham marriage. Find a normal, adequate girl. You explain everything. You sign the papers. I'll take Kevin. We'll be married for a year, and then we'll get a divorce. The nephew will stay with me anyway. James shook her head. Stephen, you've completely lost your head not to go crazy. Why do you have to go to all this trouble? Of course, nothing good in the fact that the nephew is brought up in an orphanage with living relatives. But maybe you should wait a little longer to adopt. Maybe you'll meet some worthy ones along the way. And marry for love. I don't have time, Stephen. And besides, I've already met someone worthy. I know exactly who I want to marry for love, but due to certain circumstances, we can't be together yet. But she asks me to take her son. And without her requests, I would never have let my nephew go to a state home. The next day, James walked briskly into the cafe and saw Lucy sitting at the table. He'd called an hour ago and arranged to meet her here. James, you're late. Pretending to be, angrily, muttered the girl. Kind of unemployed right now. You can't make it to a meeting on time. I'm sorry for running around for everything. But I see you didn't waste any time either. Decided to have a big lunch, nodded James on a large portion of pilaf, standing in front of the friend. Of course I did. Why should I starve while you're waiting for me to get here? All right, spit it out. What happened? From what I hear, all your hard work went to waste. Kathy got locked up. Yeah, that's right. There's not much to tell. You tell me. Did you find a driver to take my place? I found another driver, but no friend, smiled the girl. It's all right. You and I didn't become friends right away. Not the right case. In your place is now a distinct pensioner. With him, even I cannot be friends. A purely business relationship, laughed Lucy. She was generally a cheerful, easygoing girl. James could relax with her. This girl could find a reason to laugh in any situation, even the most difficult. After his brother's funeral, James had to quit because all his time was spent trying to prove Kathy's innocence. In addition, Stephen insisted that James return to the store as a supervisor, so that Kevin wouldn't end up with an unprofitable business in the future. Yeah, after all, the stores were his father's baby. And no matter what the circumstances, business had to continue. Lucy, look, James said, you and I have discussed many topics, but you've never said anything about your personal life. You have a boyfriend, but a favorite fiancé. I don't know how to put it right. Lucy almost choked on a sip of coffee, which she decided to wash down her dense lunch, returning the cup with the drink on the table. She looked at James with wide-open eyes. Why the questions? Not out of curiosity. You're right. I was going to ask you for your help to propose a sham marriage to me, so that Kevin would be given to me. I'm in, and that's what Lucy said. You can't ask about anything right away. You can't even think about it. I've already thought about everything. The girl smiled. The other day we talked to Stephen. He told me everything. I guessed the reason for our meeting, but I decided to play the surprise until the last. I'm very good at it. It's true that each of you sees the situation differently. Stephen wants you to have the baby, but only so you can run the stores. But I'm sure you just love your nephew and some other people. That's true, isn't it? Once again, James nodded. Jenna is also a candidate for the role of guardian. The girl who's been living with Nick lately. There's no way that's going to happen. She doesn't want the boy. She's after the inheritance. So I can count on you, Lucy. Yes, of course. Why not? I'm free as a bird at the moment. And what's not to help a friend? I rarely say this, but you're a good man. Prison hasn't spoiled you. People like you are very rare. The boy should definitely be with you. Wait together for your Kathy, and you'll be happy. We could get married tomorrow. Except maybe we should make it look like we're living together. And you and I should have a house. Do you have a plan? And I did have a plan. After my brother's death, one very interesting detail came to light. It turned out that the will signed by his father only covered the business, and it didn't say a word about the house. Nick simply lied to his brother about the real estate in the hope that he would not specify. So he did. And now that everything was out in the open, James could easily be the sole owner of the house. That's where he planned to live with Kevin. At least for the first time, to sign the day after Lucy was ready. The couple didn't make it. Well, they didn't have to wait a month at the registry office. Stephen all arranged the necessary acquaintances, and a small gratitude in cash equivalent played a role. And in a week, James and Lucy officially became husband and wife. Lucy turned out to be a good actress. In front of the guardianship authorities, she was a nice homegirl. Tattoos covered with sleeves, and even wore a dress almost for the first time in her life. Custody had to be fought for. In addition to Jenna was drawn and distant relatives, the existence of which James did not even suspect. The guy had to go through 33 instances, knocking on all the doors. But at least then justice prevailed. As Stephen put it, Kevin was given to his own uncle, though he joined once, but now he is an exemplary family man with a big house. James would never forget the day he came to the infant home to pick up his nephew. How fast was Kevin running toward him? With his little legs, the boy had lost a lot of weight, and when James hugged him, the little boy closed his skinny arms around his neck. At that moment, James had tears in his eyes. Lucy, on the other hand, immediately made her stand. She helped James. She had married him legally, but quit her job and devote all her time to taking care of the child. When they moved into James' parents' house, fictitious spouse took a spacious room on the second floor, and James and Kevin were placed on the first floor. Kevin did not leave James without attention for a minute. Everywhere crowds follow him like a tail. The boy suffered stress after his stay at the orphanage. It took about a month before Kevin began to resemble his old self, a cheerful, active boy. That's when Stephen was more active on James. James, I understand, of course. A child demands maximum attention, but you can't lead your father's business. The stores are running at a loss. I told you, I'm not a manager and I can't manage. That's even more fun, you know. Business has been bad. And now we need a firm hand. What are you waiting for? For Dad's business to go bankrupt. You've officially become the heir's guardian, taking over and putting things in order. How am I supposed to leave this? There are two options. Either we put the boy in a nursery or we hire a nanny. No, the nursery's not right for us. Kevin's not out of the nursery yet, but not Anya. James, all I'm asking is that you don't drag it out. There's nowhere else to go. If you want, I can help you. I know a woman of pre-retirement age. Of course, she has no special education, but she has a wonderful experience with children, and most importantly, kind and responsible. For this I vouch. Do you want me to talk to her? James hesitated to leave Kevin with a strange woman the guy did not want. But on the other hand, Stephen, it's time things in the stores were going badly, and James knew why and how to fix it. All right, Stephen, you got yours? Talk to your friend. Have her come over. I'll take a look at her. Lucy and Kevin, sitting right on the living room floor, on a huge fluffy rug, were assembling a large castle from a constructor. The boy was engrossed and panting with pleasure, building tall towers. Lucy, though she didn't mind. Sometimes Kevin ate with hidden irritation. Every now and then he glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. She had a date in an hour, and James still hadn't returned from his store. Well, finally, the girl exclaimed when she saw her fictitious husband entering the living room. "I've been waiting for you for ages. I have to run away." "Why are you sitting with Kevin? Where is Maria?" asked James. Picks up in his arms, sweat running to him. "Child. James, did you even look at the clock? Let Maria go. I mean, she needs to be home sometimes. But you know, I didn't expect you to hold on so tight, did I? Sorry, a lot of paperwork piled up, even though I've only been away for 3 days. And by the way, you never told me about your trip. How's Kathy holding up?" "Yeah, I wouldn't say she's holding up. She's lost a lot of weight. You can tell she's got nothing but her eyes. It's bad. Pictures of her in prison, real bad. The only joy in her life, as she told me herself, was my arrival and the new pictures of Kevin. She couldn't tear herself away from them. Kathy says that Kevin looks happy in the pictures, and that makes her happy. But still, looking at her, I don't think she'll last long there. We have to do something. We have to do something." "But what? What can you do, James? You've done everything you can. There's nothing you can do. Besides, let's say you're sure Kathy didn't kill your brother. Stephen and I have our own version. What's more delicate than that? On the contrary, I'm sure Kathy's in jail for the case." "What do you mean?" "It wasn't her fault, of course. Her husband must have beaten her. I think there should be an article. A different one. In a state of effect, for example. But for that she had to confess. She's the one who pushed your brother out of desperation. And I'm sure, but Kathy says she did. I don't know what Kathy says. That's it, James. I really don't have time for this. It's already been said 1,000 times. Okay, Kevin's had dinner. I left. Lucy didn't get home until the morning. It was a day off, and it was safe to go to bed. But there was no sleep in the girl's eyes. She sat patiently in the kitchen and waited for James to come out for breakfast. "You've been home a long time. Why are you sitting there?" asked James when the girl waited for him. "Here you are, waiting while you are sick. I heard the door slammed. Maria came in." "Yeah, she's in the nursery dressing Kevin." "What did you want to talk about?" "Listen, James, here's the thing. Anyway, last night, my confidence was a little low. I already told you about the guy from the beleaguered salon I'm dating. We spent the whole night together tonight. Look, let's skip the details," James grumbled. "I love you, of course, but not enough to listen to all that." Okay. No one was going to give you the details. We spent the whole night with him. And naturally, we had a chance to talk about a lot of different things. And I learned something. Turns out Jenna's mom is getting massages from Anthony. And she's a very chatty woman, I must say. And what she likes to talk about most is her daughter, touting her virtues. I mean, she's got to get her to someone. How perky Jenna is, how confident she is, how she can stand up for herself. No man would ever raise a hand to Jenna. No consequences. And the one who did, still in the picture as if alive. Anthony certainly doesn't listen much to the chatter of his clients. But at this point, Jenna's mom had stopped talking as if she'd said too much. And Anthony was alarmed by this moment. There's something else. Remembered Jenna's alibi. Allegedly, on the day Nick died, her mother was sick, and she had to go to her house before lunch. Well, in fact, that very afternoon, Jenna's mom was at Anthony's for a massage, and she was feeling fine. Wait, get excited, James. This was definitely the day. Your Anthony can't be wrong. He could be if he didn't keep records of all his massages and his clients. He always has a notebook of those notes in his car, and he and I double-checked it. It's absolutely accurate. So what's the story? James was almost screaming with excitement. Jenna was lying. So her mom wasn't sick, and she probably didn't leave the house that day. She could have killed Nick. Parents are parents to confirm their children's alibis. That's it. That's what I was thinking, Lucy said grimly. But don't get too excited. It doesn't prove anything. And the police won't even talk to you about it. Lucy, you know, Jenna calls me a lot. At first, she wanted to meet Kevin, but she said she missed him, wanted to come here to the house, and when I suggested we meet on the playground during a walk, she immediately refused. And now she says that she has some things left in this house and she needs to get them urgently. So I offered to give them to her myself. But again, Jenna refused. She says she doesn't remember where things are and wants to look for them herself. In general, there is a burning desire to get into our house. I didn't think it was strange at first. But now, with the recent news, I'm curious. Lucy was very curious. That's what Jenna's up to. Maybe there's something here that confirms she didn't leave the house that day, and Jenna wants to destroy it. Or the murder weapon. It hit James. Now let's say Jenna stabbed Nick with the scissors, and they weren't found near the body. What did she do with them? Took them with her. And if she didn't, what if she hid them somewhere in the house, and now she wants to take them out? But she's been very insistent on coming to our house, and that's a variant of you sometimes think. Lucy said with a respectful glance at her friend. And what should we do with you in this case? I know we should install cameras all over the house and invite Jenna. But that would be very expensive. Lucy exclaimed. Imagine, cameras in every room would cost you so much money. If there's any chance of proving Kathy's innocence, I don't care about any money. Stephen was angry. You bet, James was on fire with delusions again. When will he finally realize that Kathy is in jail for the case? She did it herself. And it's useless to prove her innocence. Business at the store only got a little better. And James took some of the proceeds so he could install cameras all over the place. And now he's come to him for help. Stephen, well, you have to understand, it's for a reason. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Jenna's behavior is very suspicious. At the cemetery during the funeral, I noticed her lip was split. Maybe Nick hit her too. God only knows what happened between them afterward. Let's check it out. Do you know anyone on the police force? Yeah, an old man waved his hands in the air. He sometimes comes here to the store for parts for his foreign car. Well, he and I can talk about the weather. That's all. But this is serious business. What you're doing requires a search warrant. Do you need probable cause? There isn't, James. What you're saying is bullshit. You're just grasping at straws. No one in the police force is going to take that into account. And if it's for money? With a desperate gleam in your eye, James asked. I've never paid a bribe in my life. And frankly, I don't know how. But if you give, as they say, a bribe, then I think the policeman will go along with us. Stephen shook his head tiredly. All right, James, I'll try to help you again. Let's just agree with you one last time. I mean, your fixation on Kathy's innocence. If things don't work out with Ira now, you'll settle down. Promise me that you'll settle down and laugh off Kathy's time served, and you'll wait for her like you should for 10 years. And Jenna was desperate to get into the house where she used to live with Nick. But one day James called her, and it was a surprise. I'm home tonight. You can come pick up whatever you want. And why did you suddenly get there so soon? She asked suspiciously. Well, the house, I think. To sell things we'll still have to take out. So if there's something of yours here, come and take it. What's the matter? That's a relief, Jenna. So you're selling after all. Okay, I'll come by tonight at 7 o'clock. That'll be fine. When Jenna gingerly crossed the threshold of the house, it seemed to her that it would be easy. But nevertheless, the terrible memories of Katya or the girl wave, it was strange. Jenna did not consider herself an impressionable person. James met the girl on the first floor. Hi, want some tea? Kevin and I are having dinner. I wouldn't say no. The girl was glad that James was already busy in the kitchen. Perfect. There was just one more thing Jenna was worried about. Is your wife home? She asked. Glanced around the stairs to the second floor. No, Lucy's not home. Kevin, say hello. Do you remember Aunt Jenna? The boy looked indifferently at his unfamiliar aunt. He certainly didn't remember her. In the kitchen, James put the vegetable stew on the plates and realized, and we might as well have dinner with us. Oh, no. I'll just have tea. The girl waited for James and Kevin to start eating, making sure they wouldn't be getting up from the table anytime soon. Sipped the tea and grumbled, "Oh, it's so hot. Let it cool down a bit. I'll be going now. I'll get what I was going to get. I'm going up to the second floor. Do you mind?" "Let me, of course," without blinking an eye, the guy answered. Jenna went out and closed the door behind her. Lucy, who was actually in the house, was sitting, and at this very moment in the room under the stairs of the very room that Nick had once allocated for James, and through a slit in the open door. Lucy watched her guest and was a little startled when Jenna, instead of going to the second floor, rushed under the stairs. It seemed to Lucy that Jenna was about to burst into that room, but the one stopped early. She shook her hand deep into the stairwells and pulled out from there an object gleamed chief her hands from the color of the chandelier. Jenna slipped the find into her small purse with lightning speed and then headed for the second floor. Lucy, holding the phone in her hands, called out, "Come in. Come in right now. She needs to be searched right away." She put something in her bag. Jenna went downstairs without a care in the world. With a sense of accomplishment, she'd done what she'd come here to do. She didn't need any more of these ridiculous conversations with James, and she didn't really want to have tea with them. The only thing she wanted to do was to get out of this house quickly and get rid of the fire that lived in the purse clutched tightly to her body. Jenna shuddered as she walked down to the first floor and ran into a crowd of people. There stood James, Lucy, Stephen, and worst of all, two men in police uniforms. One of the policemen held out his hand to Jenna. "Let me see your bag." "On what grounds?" screamed Jenna, clutching her hands tightly to the accessory. "And on that basis," answered for the policeman. Smirking snidely, "Lucy, that I saw with my own eyes how you pulled something from the stairwells. Something very interesting. I was sitting in this room, and I saw everything." Lucy pointed her hand under the stairs. "She's lying. She had nothing to see." "I could be lying, of course," Lucy continued. "There's no camera." "What cameras?" Jenna's eyes ran frightenedly. The girl frantically looked around the walls to her horror. Only now she came across a faintly visible red light. Yes, you're not wrong. That's exactly the camera. And it's got the right angle. It's covering the area under the stairs. What the hell is going on here?" Yelling Jenna. "Let me out of the house. I don't know what you want from me. You're crazy. I'm not gonna let you look in my bag. You have no right. You need a warrant for that. Or what do you call it?" "He's laughing," the policeman said calmly. "Here you are, please." He shoved a paper under Irina's nose. "Now I'm going to have to examine your purse." Jenna struggled like a tiger, clutching at the leather strap. But the forces were unequal, and the bag ended up in the hands of the policeman. One of them opened it, looked at the others, and then with a napkin carefully extracted an object lying right on top of it. That object turned out to be sewing scissors, picks, stains on the point. "There, I told you so." "You," exulted James, almost throwing yourself hard with joy. "Surprised at you." "Wow," hummed the man. "Yes, James, you were right this time. I never would have guessed." "Oh, Jenna, what was it like for you to watch an innocent woman, Kathy, go to jail?" "Innocent? Why would she be innocent?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "What is this?" "It's not mine at all. I don't know how those scissors ended up in my bag. You planted them on me. Let me out, and I'll go home." Jenna got in trouble, trying to shove the people in front of her. But the cops took her firmly under the elbow. "Are you under arrest?" one of them announced briefly. "What do you want here?" with anger asked Jenna, who had come to see her in the detention center. James. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you." "Why did you do it? Why did you kill my brother?" "Oh, what hypocrisy. You hated your brother as much as he hated you. And she didn't kill anyone." First there was Jenna, and then she looked back at the escort who had brought her in. The uniformed man was standing far enough away that he couldn't hear their conversation. Jenna's face twisted with rage and she was carried away. "You know I'm going to tell you, though. You're already figuring it out. What's the big deal?" Why did I kill your brother, you ask? Because he was an asshole. He took advantage of me for the smallest of favors. I never got any real expensive gifts from him. I moved into his house. I was gonna live with him, get married, adjust, live, cook him dinners, lunches, breakfasts. That doesn't sound like me at all. I turned into a housewife. But you know, I wanted to marry him, I really did. And why did he keep looking for his stupid Kathy? And when he did, he brought a baby home and made me babysit it. And even after that coup de grace, I was ready to move on with him, to look after a boy I didn't need at all. Your brother just waited until he decided to bring his ex-wife back into the house, and he told me to get out of the house. Can you imagine getting out of the house like a used rag? He just wiped my feet, and when I started to make reasonable complaints to him in raised tones, he hit me with all his might in the face, smashed my lip. That's when I went into a rage. Nobody treats me like that. And I wasn't going to kill him anyway. No, I wasn't. I knew where those scissors were. I opened the drawer. I jammed them in with my hand. I wanted to poke him in the shoulder, but your brother's a coward. He tried to dodge, and it hit him in the chest. Nick collapsed like a Leatherman. That's where I sang. I panicked bad. I should have gotten those scissors out of the house right away. And I panicked like a fool and put them under the stairs before I had a chance to think about it. So your parents knew and deliberately covered for you. My mom knew, so what? That's why she's my mom. She's proud of me too, and she thinks I should never get hurt. Yeah, she is. What did you want? Except, you know, you're the only one who heard everything I said in here. I really wanted to get it out. I'm tired of keeping it all inside. But no one else will hear it from me. I'll deny my guilt to the end. No one can prove anything with a pair of fucking scissors. Not a bloody pair of scissors, but the murder weapon. James answered calmly. Today it became known that fingerprints were found on them. Yes, that can't be true, Jenna exclaimed. I erased them. Well then, James smirked. A couple of prints were found. Next time you kill someone, be careful. The case has been remanded, and Kathy will be released soon. Kathy, are you and your brother obsessing over that blessed girl? It's all her fault. Letting her husband use her as a punching bag. All Nick had to do was fight back in the beginning, like I did. If only that coward hadn't tried to dodge, he'd have gotten off with a blank shoulder. And Kathy deserves to go to jail. I'll have the best lawyer in the world, and they won't prove I'm guilty. So they won't let your basket go. Don't be happy. But Kathy was released. The girl sobbed when she saw her son. She had already resigned herself to the fact that she would have to serve a full term and could not believe what was happening. It seemed to Kalina that this was just a dream, and it was about to end, and she would have to return to the horrible prison routine. Lucy and James watched with a smile on their faces as Kathy pulled Kevin against her and squeezed him so tightly that it hurt a little at times. Despite this, Kevin never once ventured out, never complained, but only pressed himself against his mother, clutching his hands into her thick hair. As the girl gave birth to her arms and let her son go to the floor, she poisoned herself, examined herself. I need to wash up. I need a shower right away. Why do you ask? Stupid laughed. Sure, go ahead, be afraid. I'll get you a towel and a clean robe. After Kathy left to wash herself off the smell of prison, Lucy glanced cheerfully at James. Well, hubby, our marriage is coming to an end. Who's going to file first, you or me? Whatever, James shrugged. You want to go together. I hope you're not mad at me. You've been helping me so much. You're my closest friend, Lucy. You don't have to leave this house if you want. Stay as long as you want. You know, I think I'm gonna take you up on your offer. When I found out Kathy was cleared of all charges, I made a decision I've been making for a long time. I'm gonna be here for another week. And in that time, I'll get my affairs in order, and then I'll leave. Where are you going? James exclaimed. What are we gonna do without you? Well, you'll manage somehow. Lucy said, I'm going to the metropolis. I'll make up my mind this week. Maybe I'll find my destiny in a big city. I hope so, said James and stepped forward and hugged her. Lucy, this is so great. Thank you for everything. For being you, for meeting you. If I didn't have you and Stephen right now, things would be really bad. I know that. Oh, don't give me any of that tenderness. Lucy poked James in the shoulder with her fist. Because I'm so upset, I'm going to cry. And I'm not supposed to have an image. Besides, why are you hugging me? I'm not leaving yet. You told me I'd be gone a week. We'll cuddle in a week. Kevin was long asleep and Kathy was still sitting next to his crib. She could not take her eyes off the native pilot. The girl spent almost the whole day with her son and still could not believe in what was happening. Could something good really happen to her? Behind the nursery door, the floors creaked. Kathy knew it was James, shuffling from foot to foot in there for the last hour, waiting for her to come out. They hadn't talked, and talk they should. Was Kathy ready for that conversation? Yes, she was. The girl got up from her chair, turned down the brightness, put on her headphones, and walked out to James. Kathy, you will marry me, blurted out James the lyrics to Shiny. If it's been on his tongue since morning. That's how confused Kathy was at once. I thought you were still married. You know what marriage is and what it was for, don't you? Lucy, she's Lucy. She's a wonderful person, finished Kathy. I'm very grateful to her for the boyfriend. I didn't get the chance today, but I'll be sure to tell her that. And yes, James, of course I'll marry you. That and yourself. That's you know how I feel about you. James took Kathy's hand and pulled her to him. Did the girl pull away? No, not now. I'm sorry, but I'm not ready yet. There's some kind of moral block inside. I don't know if you understand me. I understand, James sighed. I'll wait. He turned around and went to his room. Sleep wasn't working. Just behind the wall was the one he needed, the one he'd been fighting for so long. The door of the room creaked open softly, and Kathy stood on the threshold, illuminated by the moonlight from the window, wearing a light nightgown. James, what am I talking about? What am I not ready for? Yes, I've been dreaming about this almost from the moment we first met. I don't remember the moment I fell in love with you. I want to be with you now and always for the rest of my life. Subscribe and click the bell. All modern hospitals have one thing in common. Life there has a special rhythm. Although the interiors are sterile, the environment changes every second of the day and night. From the outside, this heavy traffic may seem akin to Brennan's, but at a closer look, even a person far from medicine will realize how calibrated the algorithm of hospital life. Stephen felt like a fish out of water when he first arrived at the hospital. He had given more than 20 years to his favorite profession and knew perfectly well how this complex mechanism called a multidisciplinary clinic worked. And he was very proud of the fact that he was one of the cogs of this system. The doctor also liked to philosophize about his purpose in this troubled world. In the circle of colleagues, the man liked to repeat our mission to meet a new life. And that's fine. When you hold a little person in your arms, you feel like God, if not God, then his special representative on earth. It's a unique feeling. That morning, Stephen was also thinking about it, because he was about to perform a major operation to save another little life. He was already heading towards the opera block, as a dimensional figure of an older nurse, Camille Hold, suddenly appeared on his way. We'll have to postpone the operation for a while. Were you required by the chief to take such liberties with a junior in rank? Could well be construed as a breach of medical ethics. But in a lifeline clinic, in exceptional cases, it was allowed. All the more so for Camille, the oldest woman on the ward. She regarded everyone as her children, and she talked to the whole staff in that way. The most interesting thing is that doctors and nurses saw this good-natured woman as a second mother. Many shared secrets with her, and some even cried on her shoulder, and the head nurse found the right words for everyone. Noticing that the doctor hesitated, Camille repeated the address, but a tone louder. But why are you frozen? Run to the chief on the carpet. He has something urgent to do with you. I told him we have women on the operating table. The situation is critical. And he wants Kazansky to see me. Don't worry about it. I've already warned Brown. That news has calmed the doctor down a bit. She hasn't left yet. Thank you. You're our lifesaver. Only instead of a fairy costume, I'm wearing a sterile gown that repels not only bacteria, but also cute elves. The woman made an expressive gesture with her hand and continued along the usual route. Stephen hurried to the elevator. The office of the chief was a floor above. There was a small coup in the reception area, and the receptionist looked at the newcomer with undisguised displeasure. She immediately pressed the selector button. Christopher is here. Good, I understand you. The sour expression was instantly replaced by a duty smile. Is the chief expecting you? Come on in. Stephen had time to think that this nice girl should work in the theater, not in a medical institution. Only good actors can change their faces that fast. Christopher was talking to someone on the phone. He nodded the visitor to a chair and continued talking. Don't worry, Rick, everything will be fine. But even a good doctor can't account for all the pitfalls. I'm not making excuses. You got that right. Stephen realized the supervisor was talking to the supervisor and forgot to make sense. The man put the receiver on the machine. Then with a handkerchief, he brushed the sweat off his forehead. Here you, staffers, do not even suspect what labor is not worth defending you. But the most interesting thing is that you don't even appreciate it. You think I'm a hardened bureaucrat. For a minute there, Stephen felt sorry for him. Not a bad man. In principle, with whom he had more than just an official relationship. After all, Christopher was the father of his wife. That is, in the circle of the closest relatives. But at work it was not supposed to remember about it. So the doctor limited himself to the standard form of sympathy. Christopher, we appreciate and respect you. But I'd like to know why you called me in on such short notice. I have a patient in surgery. The chief grimaced. I understand your outrage, but I ordered Brown to replace you. She can handle it. I have no doubt that Emily can handle it. But the man's been off duty 24 hours. It's no big deal. It's not the first time she's been married. It's what we do. You take it easy. Do you need your help? I can't get anyone else to do it because you're the only one with a good mouth. I don't get it. Explain more. The chief waved his hand dismissively. You see, I'm also under pressure from above. I got a call from the region. They want an interview for television. And you know what my relationship with these sharks of the pen is like, don't you? But Christopher canceled the operation for the sake of talking to journalists. Yes, some tests. First of all, nobody canceled anything. And secondly, for the sake of the image of the institution, you can sacrifice something. I mean, it's all about PR. What did you think? Market conditions demand that without this, as you say, PR, we will remain in the backyard. You think I'm comfortable with that? I'm a doctor, and I'm supposed to be doing this kind of crap. Christopher was really going at it. It was obvious that he had a lot on his mind, too. And Stephen once again felt a pang of pity for this not young man. All right, I'll give the damn interview when the reporter shows up. You're glad he's here. He's already here, waiting for you and your resident. But it's a girl, and she's quite pretty. Just make sure you don't get too comfortable. Stephen stared at the chief in bewilderment. Are you saying there's an unauthorized person in my ward at this moment? I know it's a breach of regulations, but the press representative asked me very much, begged me to let her experience the working atmosphere of the maternity ward. But we can make an exception. No, Christopher, you can't. I'll take questions, but she's not going to get past the sterile barrier. And I'm not going to disrupt the regimen because someone else wants to. We don't have enough hospital-acquired infections. I don't have the authority to order it. You're in charge. It's your call. Stephen felt his nerves clench into springs. He was already imagining how he was going to put this as yet unknown journalist in her place. With anger, the doctor's fists clenched automatically, so he had to catch his breath a little before entering the residence room. It turned out that a whole group of television employees were waiting for him. A cameraman was indifferently checking the equipment, and a skinny girl in a ridiculous blouse with huge flowers was writing something in a notebook. Another older woman with a neat suitcase sat on a sofa. Seeing this company, Stephen could hardly restrain himself from the harshest words. He called the nurse on duty. Why are they without gowns? What kind of vigilantism is this? The girl with the notebook. She answered for the nurse. Don't scold the nurse. It's not her fault. We've done away with the gowns. I have to be on camera all the time, and the cameraman is just uncomfortable in a gown. The doctor's cup of patience was overflowing, and he lashed out at the uninvited guests. Who are you to give orders around here? Do you realize that this is a maternity ward, and here is a special regime? Therefore, all outsiders are a danger to the lives of moms and babies. The girl barely reached the doctor's shoulder. She obviously did not expect such an outburst of anger on his part. She started stuttering out of fright. But I didn't know it was so serious. We just wanted to do a live shot. Don't even dream about it. And anyway, didn't they teach you in your office that before you go to the object, you should first study its features? Maiden nervously rubbed her wet blouse with thin fingers, and her voice trembled with excitement. Yes, I've been warned. But I didn't think it was that serious. I need to get the material done soon. It's a miracle. You see, she has an emergency. The girl is a special needs institution, while Stephen brought the inexperienced journalist up to speed. A nurse brought gowns for the entire creative team. The woman, the valise, and the cameraman quickly paid for themselves in white robes. The girl followed their example as well. But from confusion, her hands were shaking badly, and she could not get into the sleeves of the protective clothing in any way. The doctor felt embarrassed for his not too friendly attitude towards the TV crew. He decided to help the girl who was ready to cry. She gratefully accepted the help. Thank you, Stephen. You see, this is the first time I've been assigned to do serious reporting. I just wanted it to be at the highest level. I know exactly what you mean. I was young and inexperienced myself. No offense, but I want to give you some useful advice. As you call the girl by her first name, she became Evelyn. You mean Evelyn. That's very nice. So, Evelyn, I advise you in the future to specify everything to the details, even before you start work. I don't know who you agreed with, but I had to transfer my patient to another doctor because of your unexpected visit, and I can see that I'll have to cancel my plans for the whole day. That's the unfortunate story. The journalist Evelyn asked in a pathetic, childish way. I'm sorry, please, honestly. I didn't realize it was so serious. Stephen noticed that the other members of the group remained silent during the conversation. It didn't escape his gaze. What's on the face of the bag lady? A gloating expression froze. Only the cameraman was still staring blankly out of the window. The doctor mentally concluded, wow, it seems that intrigue is rampant in the creative field too. Did these two best carp know exactly what they were up to? And deliberately set the girl up for a hit. But the doctor kept his thoughts to himself and said aloud a common phrase. Father Frost, translated from Latin, is the oldest language, which is still used in medicine. Cicero's phrase means what times are like today. So let's cut to the chase. The girl was pleased, smiled, gave signs of activity, and the operator. Only the lady with the briefcase remained in the same position. Evelyn reprimanded her. We're on it. Clean up my face. I was a little nervous. And the doctor had a forehead and cheekbones too. Don't push me. Girl, I can see perfectly well. I was struck by the lady's voice. He was thinking of asking if she was not voicing old lady Shapokliak or grandmother Yaga at the studio, but he held back in time. The person named Clara opened her casket and got down to business. I must say, she was very skillfully wielding all sorts of meters and brushes. Then the cameraman determined convenient places for shooting. The girl Evelyn asked the standard questions. Stephen was surprised to recognize that she worked very professionally. She never once looked into her notebook, but asked more questions as the conversation progressed. The competent actions of the young journalist bribed the doctor. But was there something else special about this girl that made his heart tingle? Evelyn, for obvious reasons, I can't take you to the delivery room, but we can visit the happy moms together. I'll just let the nurses know. By the way, feeding time is coming up, but we're strictly on the clock, so you can film some very touching scenes. Thank you. That's great. The girl jumped up on the spot with delight. Clara Modesto threw an unkind look in her direction. Stephen was sure that the Sorpus would snitch on the girl, but he did not speak out loud. The interview took almost 2 o'clock. Saying goodbye to the guests, Stephen saw Brown walk tiredly out of the operating room. She waved hello to him. Everything is all right. The doctor did not hold back and reproachfully addressed the journalist. While we were talking to you, my colleague saved 2 lives at once. These are the heroes of our time. They are the ones you should be reporting on. After a minute, he regretted what he had said and did not take out his notebooks and began to quickly write something in it. Clara watched her with undisguised dislike. The cameraman and makeup artist hurried to the elevator. I didn't stay long. Stephen, I wanted to ask you something else, not for the interview. Go ahead. I'd be happy to answer your question, as long as it's not about my personal life. It's a little concerning. Tell me, did you immediately decide to become a doctor, or did you dream of another profession? No, this path was predetermined by fate itself. My mom spent almost 40 years in medicine, and I just couldn't choose another profession. One more question. Yes, where did you start practicing medicine? Well, usually after college, they send everyone away. That's what happened to me too. I had to work for 2 years in a wonderful town with the romantic name of Kamyshin. Evelyn jumped for joy again. What a coincidence. My relatives live in Kamyshin. You're from there too. Stephen did not like that the girl was interested in such details. He evasively answered no. I only practiced there, but that was a long time ago. More than 20 years ago. To be honest, I've already forgotten what the town looks like. Stephen twisted his heart because he often recalled his early years in a small town in the countryside. It was the annoying journalist who had stirred up something in his soul that he had been hiding all these years. Stephen had always considered himself a capital city dweller, although his childhood and youth were spent in the Moscow suburbs. However, in Liberty, all the guys considered themselves cool, and there were many reasons for this. But the main thing is that it was in this city that the Lube Band appeared. Therefore, all residents from preschoolers to old people were proud of their compatriotism with the popular collective. Stephen was also a fan of musicians, but at that time to get a ticket to a concert of Lube was unrealistic. For 2 reasons, the fabulous price and the limited number of tickets themselves. But the most difficult thing was finances. In the family, apart from Stephen, there were 2 younger brothers, and the only breadwinner was the mother. Jenna worked as a midwife, and to feed her boys, she was at the hospital 24 hours a day. But even working 2 jobs couldn't cover all the expenses. At first, the father sent child support, and then he disappeared without a trace. One day, Stephen found a letter with a strange stamp in the drawer of his dresser, and reading it, he realized that his father is in places very remote. He never told anyone about this fact from his biography. And then, when he received a passport, he took his mother's maiden name. But Jenna, despite the workload, knew perfectly well about the hobbies of her sons because she tried to be aware of the affairs of each. One day, she suggested to the eldest, "Stephen, to us temporarily to work in the emergency room is required in the nursing department. You only have to work 2 night shifts a week. If you want, I can arrange to take you on weekends. You can earn some money for your pocket money." The young man agreed right away. After a month, he was so absorbed in his work that he decided to become a doctor, even though his first salary was small. He was able to buy a ticket to see his favorite band. There was still money left over for candy for his younger brothers and flowers for his mom. Jenna, from the excess of feelings, even wept. "Edichka, I haven't even noticed how you've grown up. You're already earning your own money." Encouraged by his first success, The boy assured his mother that this was just the beginning. "Mom, I will definitely become a doctor and will get good money." The woman cried even more. "Son, to get into the institute, you need to have a BLAT or a certificate with only A's. And you have neither. And there's no one to help us. Our family is all poor. Stephen, hug. Don't cry. And believe me, I'll get in. There must be a dynasty of Kazan doctors." Jenna laughed. "I'm not a doctor, midwife. I mean, it's the middle tier. And why are you talking about Kazans? It was my last name before I got married. Mom, I decided to take your last name. Here's the passport." The woman looked at the document and couldn't find words. "Son, but it's not allowed. According to the law, children must take their father's name." "Mom, you're wrong. A child has the right to choose any surname of his parents. I've decided I'm going to be a Kazan dynasty." "Sounds great. Didn't you say my grandfather was in medicine?" "Yes, he was a paramedic, and Mom was a professor at the pharmacy. So you see, it's a dynasty. Don't worry about getting in. There's still time for me to do better in my studies." Stephen didn't have a problem with his studies. He was considered one of the best students in the school. But still, he couldn't get a red certificate. He spent the rest of the year studying hard. And as a result, he received a document with only one B. Teachers were amazed at the boy's ambition. What a good boy. Too bad he got a B in math. Well, Stephen was not upset about it. He was sure that he would definitely get in at the first attempt. Probably, it was this confidence that gave him strength during the entrance exams. When he saw his name on the list of students, his excitement eased. But the purposeful young man also did not allow new results. All the years of student life, the guy also devoted to study. He did not go to discos and did not even meet with girls, although they were very actively trying to win his favor. When the guys joked about this, he cheerfully replied, "Finish the institute to make up for lost time. I will have a temporary harem, and a whole week will devote to a body life. In the meantime, you have to sacrifice something for a bright future. To make it easier on Mom." Stephen was working part-time at the clinic as an orderly. His past experience helped him a lot. His older coworkers used to tease him all the time. "Student, where did you learn all this stuff? You can already be trusted with a scalpel." Of course, the praise was pleasant to the guy, but he never turned up his nose. In his third year, he decided to choose ecology. Fellow students, they made fun of him. Stephen is not a man's business. But the guy was convinced that gender does not affect the choice of specialization. After all, for the sick doctor is a helper and savior. And whether he is a man or a woman does not matter. Stephen was sure that he would get on distribution in one of the capital's hospitals, but admitted that in the worst-case scenario, he would have to work for a couple of years in a polyclinic. But the promising student did not expect that he would be sent into exile in the unfamiliar city of Kamishin. When he learned about his unenviable fate, he almost cried. The most surprising thing is that he was the outsider, because other guys from the course, who skipped lectures and passed the state exams worse than him, were luckier. His fellow students openly laughed at him. John Williams, whose dad ran the clinic, made fun of him. But what? You don't always get the lucky ticket. Sometimes you don't. You've been listening to your brain for years, and you have to go to the woodshed. But don't despair. People live in the provinces too. There's even a club with dancing to the accordion and a bathhouse with a store. How will you settle down? Let me know. Stephen couldn't stand those arrogant guys. Often they almost got into fights, and John was always the provocateur. Fellow students tried not to hurt him, were afraid of the high position of Father Williams. Stephen, too, for many 6 years restrained himself. But having received hard labor assignments, he forgot about conventionality. Celebrating victory early. You don't know where you'll be a year from now. You're as dumb as a jackass, only thanks to your daddy. But it's dangerous to let you near the sick, because your name is Dr. Death. Witnesses to this verbal altercation held their stomachs. Well done. You got Williams on 5. That's an interesting nickname for him. With Stephen's hand, the nickname Dr. Death has indeed been firmly planted on John. So you could say he was taking revenge on his enemies. He considered for himself humiliating the prospect of working 2 years in the province. For 2 days, the boy was not himself. He could not dare to tell his mother that he would have to go to Mutarakan. But it was impossible to hide anything from Jenna. "Son, you're walking around like you're in the water. Have you already had your assignment?" Stephen lowered his head. Mom had. "So, nothing good. I was sent to the glorious city of Kamishin." Stephen expected anything tears, righteous, maternal anger, words, sympathy. But Jenna's reaction struck him dead. The mother glowed with happiness. "That's good, son. The conventional wisdom is that working in the provinces is humiliating, and the most mediocre medical graduates are sent there. But as life shows, it is in rural areas and small towns is the best place to start practicing. After all, a young specialist immediately gets to the front line. He will have to take responsibility and make decisions himself. And for a doctor, it is the most important thing. The city with a picturesque name met the young doctor is not welcoming, like a bucket of rain was pouring. So there were puddles everywhere, more resembling lakes. Until Stephen reached the local hospital, he was washed up to nothing. But the personal loss was insignificant compared to what lay ahead of him. The hospital building looked bleak and even scary. The interior also left an unpleasant impression of linoleum floors, iron beds with netting, and broken furniture. A frightened middle-aged woman reported to an elderly paramedic who volunteered to be his guide for a while. "Sam, I was left here on duty. Where did they all go?" The woman's eyes widened. "Sam, are you asking stupid questions? People are digging potatoes. It's raining like a bucket. Now the sky is cracked, but this morning it was fine." The woman looked at Sam as if she was seeing him for the first time. The man felt uncomfortable in front of the young specialist and tried to justify the actions of his colleagues. "Do not think, Stephen. We have a good, very friendly team." "Yes, that's what I noticed. Friendly. Tell me, Sam, what if there's an emergency?" "Well, God forbid, of course, bleeding or even a hypertensive crisis. What will the guard do then?" The paramedic blushed. "Then the cough is gone. We have developed a special algorithm. If something happens, calls the doctor on duty." "Wow, you even have a doctor. Good thing I won't be here alone." The paramedic proudly pointed out that we have 7 doctors on our staff, but only half of them are employed. "Do not think. We are not some backward hospital of Sarah's times, but quite a modern institution. Only our funding is poor. But that's for now." Wendy decided to support her colleague. "Don't be afraid, dear man. We have good people working for us. And when we need to cover up, I always hand them all over." "Who are you?" Stephen thought Wendy was a nurse and asked her a question just to be on the safe side. But what was his surprise when the woman shook her head proudly. Kudryashov replied, "And I'm a junior physician's assistant." Stephen felt his lower jaw slowly dropping. He looked at the embarrassed Sam. "Oh, you guys. So, everyone's off to the potato patch," and left the orderlies on the lookout. Wendy, but it offended the new doctor. "Am I not a human being? Maybe I know more than you do. I've been in a lot of binds. I can take a plaster cast and give a shot if they ask me to. What else can we do? How many doctors have been in our hospital?" "Tell Sam." But many were young and eager, but none stayed long. Wendy decided to put an end to the argument. "And I don't know what to call you. You'll find it in a year or two, too. Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna clean up before dinner's served." The tour of the hospital ended with a visit to the food block. Sam was visibly animated and praised the cooks at every turn. "Girls, we have such masters that as in a fairy tale they make soup from an axe. Valuable personnel. And you, remember, what is your duty to take a sample?" Food. The unit was on the fringe in the furthest corner of the hospital grounds. At first, Stephen thought it was a garage or a warehouse, But when he realized it was a moss-covered building where food was prepared, he couldn't help himself. Tell me, dear Sams, did they happen to make war movies in this set? Hospital. The tour guide took offense. Why don't you like it? We have a normal hospital. Thanks for that. In the neighboring district, the building has completely collapsed. Now they take their sick and laboring women to us. Even so, I didn't think there could be anything worse than this pathetic spectacle. Sam the paramedic took even more offense. Yes. Do you know what kind of people worked here? Real surgeons, top-notch. They did surgeries that you can't get in a hospital in the capital. If you like it here, you can get out of here. We're not keeping anyone. Stephen realized that he had offended an elderly paramedic who had worked in this hospital all his life. He apologized to him for a long time. And then he took the keys to the service apartment and went to the wooden building where Sam pointed to the glorious town of Chemishin. He was preparing new surprises for the young doctor. The wooden structure turned out to be a dormitory family-type room in which Stephen was to live. Also caused complete disappointment. The only thing that pleased him was hot water and a bathroom. Before he could look around, there was a knock on the door. Come in. The young man expected to see anyone but a pretty girl. Hello. Congratulations on moving in. I'm your neighbor, Vanessa. The girl confidently extended her hand. Stephen was confused for a moment. And I'm Stephen. That is, Stephen had just arrived today to serve at the local medical center. I have to admit, I still can't get over the shock. It's not surprising. I was in the same state for a while, but I got used to it. I'm thankful they gave me a place to live, or I'd have had to wander around in dark apartments. We're not coworkers by any chance, are we? I've only been working here a couple months. I was assigned to this dump right out of college. You won't believe it, but I sat there for a week. I even had bad thoughts. Vanessa laughed. It's a joke in this nice town. Only black thoughts come into your head. Of course, one gets used to everything, but I'm not going to stay here for long. I'll work my ass off and look for a better place. The whole evening the unhappy neighbors spent together. Vanessa fed the newly arrived doctor a delicious borscht, since it was the first time they had met. They decided to cement their acquaintance with a bottle of champagne. In the evening, Vanessa suggested that maybe we could go for a little walk before going to bed. I have to go on duty tomorrow morning, and I can't get used to the new place. I'm not sleeping well. As a Dutch gentleman should, Stephen volunteered to escort the girl. The weather was fine, and only huge puddles reminded of the recent rain. The streets were quiet and deserted. Only rare couples in the arms of passers-by were walking along the park path. Stephen felt cozy in the company of this girl. Vanessa, do you happen to have a feeling that we have met before? A little bit. But scientists attribute this phenomenon to the same psychotype of people. Vanessa, how you've just ruthlessly cut short my fantasies. I was already immersed in romantic reveries. I'm a realist, even a pragmatist. Do you remember the catchphrase about living life without pain? Well, yes, so that it doesn't hurt and resent wasted time. That's why I already have everything scheduled for several years ahead from the drum. I'll find a good job in the city. Perhaps I'll study further. Get married when all girls dream of getting married. Vanessa laughed. I also have this point in mind. But I won't marry the first man I meet. Excuse me for an indiscreet question, but what candidates will be considered? Only prospective ones. It may sound rude, but I don't need a simple man who works at a machine or drives for a meager salary. I see. Do you dream, as many girls do, of marrying rich men? I think they call them oligarchs nowadays. No, I'm not looking for a purse on legs, but financial stability never hurts. And the main thing, I dream to meet an established man, so that he had a good job, his own place, and other basics. And you will not be bored. Why, following your example, Vanessa, I will also refer to psychologists. So they say that when a person lives in full prosperity, he becomes wildly bored. I won't be bored. They walked until almost midnight, When they were walking back to the dormitory, Stephen noticed the silhouette of a man. Vanessa said grudgingly, "There goes that Robert again." Stephen grinned at the groomer. "Kind of like that one. I don't know where to hide from him." The guy noticed the approaching couple and immediately boiled. "Vanessa, who the fuck is this guy? Robert, what kind of language is that? It's not a Dutch. Our new doctor came from Moscow. So you're happy with the capital's cockhole, and you don't care about Robert." Vanessa wanted to say something, but Stephen beat her to it. He was much stronger and taller than Robert, and he deftly lifted him off the ground. "Look, young man, if I hear one more rude word about my neighbor and my colleague." The kid got away with what? It was nothing. "I'll give you a nail enema." Vanessa burst out laughing, and Robert flapped his eyes in confusion. "What do you mean with nails? Are there such enemas?" "They do, but they're done for prophylactic purposes." Robert left the scene of the fight, but he came right back. "Hey doc, that's my girl. I see you around her again. You're on your own. And I don't give a damn about your medical stuff like enemas and nails." It was a night Stephen would remember for the rest of his life. For Vanessa, it was also a landmark. Now, after her shift, she was in a hurry to get home, and in the evening she waited for her neighbor to return from work. Unhappy Robert was suffering from unrequited love alone on a bench near the dormitory. Stephen felt sorry for the guy, and he once said to Vanessa, "Are you sure that everything in your life will go according to the pre-scheduled plan? Don't you think that one day will come, you're gonna regret ever turning that guy down? That could happen. But I don't see that man around me." "You're wrong. At first I thought this Robert was a hapless kid too, but it turns out he's a real hero." "What do you mean?" "I mean he risked his life to save a fellow worker. They had an accident in the shop, and a man was almost crushed by a stove. And Robert reacted, got hurt himself, and saved his comrade from imminent death." The girl looked at Stephen with surprise. "Where did you get this information?" "From our hospital, I guess. Your Robert was brought in while I was on duty. You know that every doctor in our hospital is a handyman. I had to take over as surgeon yesterday, so I treated Robert for a while. Anyway, I put him in the ward. Maybe you'd like to visit him. Let the kid enjoy himself." Neighbors didn't see each other for a long time because their work schedules didn't match. It was only 3 weeks later that Stephen came face to face with Vanessa in the kitchen. The girl was excited to see him. "Listen, we live in the same apartment, but we don't see each other for weeks. For friendship's sake, you'd take me to your ward. I heard you guys are having maternity leave." Yeah. But you know, Vanessa, it's just a matter of not having a full complement of staff. For example, I've learned almost every related specialty in a few months. Can you fill in for a midwife?" "Oh, I'm probably not right for it. I can navigate an operating room with my eyes closed. Delivering a baby is a big responsibility. It's always like that when you start poaching staff. It's a bummer. I'm also in favor of getting out of here as soon as possible." "I don't know yet. Vanessa, have you changed your plans?" The girl was embarrassed on her face. A bright blush appeared. "I have some, by the way, thanks to you. I'm not going to guess yet, but maybe I'll invite you to the wedding soon." "That's interesting. Who's the lucky guy?" "Rude Robert." Stephen slyly looked at her, but could not stand it and laughed. Vanessa looked so embarrassed. "You hit the spot. But he's really not a bad guy, and his parents are really nice. By the way, Robert's mom is a teacher, and he's so rude. That's skewed. That's what your favorite psychologists explain. They think it's because of childhood complexes, but I'm very happy for you. Just hurry up with the wedding, or I'll be gone. A man promised to pull me out of this swamp called Kamishin, and as you know, that's what I want more than anything." Stephen did not lie to the neighbor. The prospect of returning to the capital really existed. For several months, the young doctor worked without weekends, and when a lot of heads accumulated, he decided to visit his mother in the electric train. He ran into John Williams quite by accident. "He was delighted to see you." What are you doing here? Honestly, I'm very happy to see you, and I repent for treating you unfairly. You know, even a year can make a man wise. Tell me, how are you doing in your John and Kamishin? You don't even realize what a shithole it is, but when you don't have the basic things you need to work, you want to cry. I have the feeling that no one in that godforsaken place has ever heard of modern medicine. Yes, this is the situation everywhere. Of course, in the capital it's a little easier, but we have to beat out even ordinary bandages. My father comes every day from work as a psychologist. He's in charge now, but you can be patient for such a position. What about your sister? I dated her for a while when I was young. And then the girl found a more affluent beau for herself. John scratched the back of his head. Jack, as usual, waiting for her prince. She had a fiancé who looked like a prince. He was, but he went to the States. Her sister suffered for a long time because he didn't take her with him. Now she's looking again. By the way, can you try to rekindle the relationship? I'm sorry, John, but you can't step in the same river twice. I think you'll agree with me on that one. I couldn't agree with you more. And my sister's no picnic. Personally, I'd run 10 kilometers without looking back. I don't envy anyone who has to live under the same roof with her. They chatted for a while, recalled some student life jokes. And John gave him a booby-trapped square. It's my business card. Now all decent guys have one. It's got all the coordinates. I hope you got a grave. No, I've only seen a picture of one. And my salary can't buy such an expensive thing. Don't be pompous. They say they pay doctors well in the countryside. That's just a rumor. But in reality, it's a pittance. A doctor's rate is more or less the same. Nurses and orderlies. My neighbor is an operating room nurse. She can work with her eyes closed. Maybe she's afraid to get paid. John pushed Stephen. Nice neighbor. She's all right. Only she's getting married soon. Too bad. I would have come to visit. Vanessa went about the apartment like a butterfly. Stephen watched her cooking with a smile. On the one hand, he was happy for his neighbor and irrepressible Robert, but at the thought that Vanessa was getting married, he felt sad. So he carefully avoided meeting with the girl one-on-one. For a while he succeeded, but one evening Vanessa herself knocked at the door of his room. Stephen, don't you think we need to have a serious talk? The young man was silent. He was afraid and waiting for this conversation. He was afraid because he could not understand his feelings. Why don't you say anything? You do realize that sometimes one word, one move can solve everything. I don't want to make a fatal mistake. I don't want that either. Suddenly, Vanessa started to cry. She spoke loudly and desperately. But why? Why do you bear all this in silence? Why do you let me go out with this Robert? He is kind and very good, but I don't love him. You see, I dream about you every night. You have no idea how many times I've stood breathlessly at your door, afraid you'd chase me away. The flow of reproaches was interrupted by a long kiss. The lovers lost track of time. They forgot about everything in the world and hugged each other and fell asleep only in the morning. Vanessa was the first to jump up. I think I overslept, Stephen said. I'm on duty too. Vanessa admired his pumped-up torso. Oh, what's that? It's a birthmark on all the men. My grandfather had a big one. My younger brothers also have one. Vanessa's eyes are on fire again. Let's call the hospital and say we've caught the plague and we're quarantined. No, I don't want the plague. Let's just keep it simple. All right, fine. Then it's chicken pox and dysentery or rubella. Vanessa, stop scaring me with scary infections or I'll run away from you. You won't. I'll find you by your birthmark and I'll get you out of the ground. In a burst of happiness, the couple completely forgot about Robert. Only on the doorstep of the apartment, Vanessa remembered her fiancé and said firmly, "There will be no wedding." Stephen, I'm right. The man was confused. I don't know yet. Everything happened so spontaneously. I must have misspoken. There will be a wedding, but not with Robert. I mean, we're together now and forever. To avoid answering the question, Stephen kissed his beloved. And at night, when he was returning from duty, near the entrance, someone came at him from behind and knocked him to the ground. From his breathing and the blows that were coming at him from different directions, the doctor realized that at least 3 people were torturing him. Before he lost consciousness, he heard Vanessa screaming, "What are you assholes doing? Leave him alone." After that, Stephen fell into a void where it was very dark. The whole battered body was pierced with pain. The first thing Stephen woke up to was Vanessa's crying face. "Honey, I'm sorry, it's all my fault." Then came the face of the district attorney. "The doctors did a great job on you. You can talk. Who attacked you? We'll draw up a report." Stephen tried to speak, but he was immediately pierced by pain. He whispered quietly, "There's no need for a report. I treated myself while I was being treated." "Precinct officers," the doctor was indignant, "do you realize that by your refusal you are encouraging criminals? I will not write and sign anything. Everything happened by accident." The policemen left with nothing. Vanessa stayed at the doctor's bedside for days. She spoon-fed him, tried to support him in every possible way. But the most important thing the man learned from her was that the girl canceled the wedding. "We're getting married now." But the doctor was silent. The girl thought that it was just hard for him to talk. Then she asked him the question several times, but he always answered evasively. "Of course, Vanessa, you and I will marry, but we must wait a little longer. I'm not quite strong enough yet. Why would you want such a useless husband? I'll faint at the most important moment." Vanessa understood the joke and waited for her lover to decide on an important step. But days went by and nothing changed. Stephen understood perfectly well that it could not go on like this. One day, when Vanessa was at work, he found John's business card and called his home phone. Tho answered right away. "It's a good thing you called. As they say, the catcher flees the beast. I was about to put out a BOLO. There's an opening at my dad's clinic. Listen, thanks. I didn't expect that. But how? I've got a settlement to make. I've got some errands to run. If you don't show up tomorrow morning, there's another candidate. There's a lot of applicants for this position. As long as you're a resident, you could be chief. So doesn't it matter?" Stephen rushed to the hospital. He applied for the settlement, explaining the urgency with his mother's illness. He was embarrassed to lie, but there was no other way out. Returning to his bachelor's den, he also hastily began to pack his things, hoping that he would be able to escape before Vanessa returned. But she had returned from work early. Seeing the packed suitcases, the girl realized everything. "Stephen, what happened? Have you thought about what's going to happen to me? I mean, everyone's gonna be pointing fingers at me." Vanessa was not crying, but there was so much despair and longing in her voice that the man felt uncomfortable. He tried to hug her, and she snuggled into his shoulder. "You promised to get married. You're running around on your own." He stroked her back like a baby. "Vanessa, you know, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I can't take you with me just yet. I have no one in the capital. I'll have to find an apartment. And then, what if I'm not a worthy candidate for you?" He lowered his eyes for a few minutes. There was silence in the room. Then the young doctor resolutely took up his suitcases. "Sorry, I'm in a hurry." He jogged down from the second floor. With the same accelerated step, he reached the train station. Only in the train carriage did he catch his breath. The man felt his face burning with fire, and his heart was torn by remorse. The train was taking him away to a new life, and the wheels backed up all the way. "You're a scoundrel. You're a scoundrel." It wasn't until years later that he realized that day was the black day of his shame. But Stephen constantly chased away the intrusive thoughts of going back and finding Vanessa. He tried to forget the girl who had believed him, but fate had a vengeance on him for that deed. The TV was on again, and Stephen sat motionless, staring at the plasma screen. "Stephen, you're all right." He snapped his fingers near his nose. The man roughly withdrew his wife's hand. What kind of stupid behavior is this? I'm not a rabbit to test my reflexes on. Something's starting to kick in at half speed. Because I want to rest. You torment me with your endless questions, Stephen. But that's understandable. I'm not a stranger. I'm your lawfully wedded wife. The woman froze for a moment. Look, maybe you have someone else. And I missed the point. Stephen stood up and walked past his wife, but she followed him. And I'm waiting for an answer. Jean, you only have one thing on your mind. I remember you weren't interested in me before. Why the sudden change? You know, I got bored. My daughter grew up. My dog got stolen from me. So it's just you. The man was pouring tea at the time. You're doing great, so I was lower on your priority list than your dog. Jana Kristinovna remarked defiantly, but you claim to be more than that. The woman poured tea too and sat down on the soft couch. More than that. It's not your stubbornness that amazes me, but how people quickly become ungrateful. Do I owe you anything? Of course you do. My father and brother had a part in your fate. If it weren't for them, you'd still be in Kamyshin, and you'd be married to some Tolstoy of a collective farmer. Jana. For your information, collective farms were abolished a long time ago. Kamyshin must have changed too. And about my marriage, you've made up your own mind. Nobody dragged you to the registry office. You're talking like that. You're ahead of yourself. So, what a modest young man you were when you wanted a better position. Stop it. You had nothing to do with this. Christopher helped me. And in return, I married you. Otherwise, Kavala would still be sitting on old cases. So as not to further inflame an already heated atmosphere, Stephen threw on his cloak and closed the door of the country mansion behind him. Jean did not like the hustle and bustle of the city and preferred to spend the summer and fall in the elite village. Although Stephen also liked the quiet life, but on the road, to work and back had to spend several hours every day. After a quarrel with his wife, he also decided to ventilate. Driven by some inner voice, he went to Paveletsky Station. In the train schedule, he found a familiar name and asked at the information desk, "How can I get to Kamyshin? There are direct flights." The girl looked at him strangely, as if he was asking not about provincial Russian cities, but about some island in the Pacific Ocean. "Our schedule hasn't changed for years. That's why it's all accurate." The man realized that he was displeased with the woman on duty because he was bothering her. He didn't want to go home, so he wandered around the city until almost midnight. Jean did not even call. Anger at his wife had not yet passed, and he swore quite loudly. Well, and sit stupid not in four walls. Enjoy your loneliness. For the night, he rented a room in a hotel, where he slept well. And in the morning, forgetting about the scandal with his wife, he went to the clinic. No sooner had he gotten to the ward. Camille, the head nurse, said in an announcer's voice, "Stephen, the head nurse wants to see you." "Ah, okay, I'm on my way. I hope I don't have to deal with the TV crew this time. I don't know. But Christopher is definitely in a bad mood today. Thanks to our good fairy for the warning. Chief Thunder and Lightning. Stephen, what's up? Where have you been all night? The gray in my beard and the devil in my ribs. What's the matter, Christopher? How could I? I was just staying at a hotel so as not to provoke my wife into a conflict. You should be talking to her, not me. You didn't tell me what to do. You'll be on the street in no time. Don't you scare me. Christopher's bad, and times ain't what they used to be. I've been invited to other clinics many times, so Vanessa's lifeline is not the end of the line." He's talking. Application on the table. Stephen replied with a sneer. "You got it, Gov." Not 5 minutes later, he returned to the chief's office with his resignation letter. Without raising his eyes from the desk, he signed it. "Get out of here. What's the name of the town? Where did I pull you from? Reeves? Almost there. Kamyshin. Here we go. No one is allowed to behave like that to my daughter." Stephen turned toward the door. Now he felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. After living with Jean for so many years, he felt that he had never become a real member of the Williams family. It wasn't that he wasn't accepted, but rather that he wasn't particularly eager to be watered. Ideally, he was expected to be silent, obedient, not to cross Jean, to do whatever Jean's father told him to do. But Stephen didn't want to, and he always had an opinion, and he really didn't like that. They're not her dads. At work, they sort of got along, but only because Christopher had to admit Stephen was a good doctor, had to admit it, but he never said it out loud. You know, Christopher, I should thank you now that we're breaking up when I'm still in my prime. I mean, I'll still have a job and a family. It's high time you took a well-deserved vacation with Jean's grandchildren. You'll never get any, because it's too late. She won't even marry again, because no one needs her. She wasn't even needed then. But I had to pay the price for my desire to change jobs. The price is very high. By the way, Christopher jumped out of her chair. Out, Stephen hummed and walked out. He felt so good after he had said it all. He was walking down the hall, and he wanted to boo. Of course, at that moment he ran into Camille. So what happened that you're smiling after going to the chief? He rounded on the head nurse. The best thing that could have happened, Camille. She looked at him in surprise. Raised your salary, promoted you. Stephen, don't tell me I've been fired already. Stephen gave the surprised woman one last twirl and walked on. She stared after him. Crazy. Find something to be happy about. Fired. It turns out that family life is over too. She shook her head and hurried away, that's all. That's the kind of news you don't get on the road. Stephen had a conversation with his wife ahead of him. He understood perfectly well that he could not expect any good from this conversation, but he was ready. What was it to endure her squeals for an hour or less when he'd endured them for so many years? Jean, I expected a very different turn. She was sure that her husband would come and apologize and urge her to talk to her father. She'd already prepared a lot of phrases to hurt her husband, but when he came home, she saw no trace of remorse. Jean sat back in her chair and turned away defiantly, but Stephen walked past her and pulled out his large suitcase. For 5 minutes, she just watched him in amazement. Then she came over. What are you doing? Packing. Why? But I think you'll at least think about it before you do. I'm leaving, and I'm doing it with great pleasure. Jean was confused. Everything was not going at all according to plan. Not according to her plan, but to lose face is not a matter of losing face. That's right. Go back to where we got you out of. Stephen turned to her. You know I will. Jean was completely confused, but he picked up the suitcase and headed for the exit. I'll file the papers myself. Stephen did not even expect that traveling by train would have such a positive effect on his psyche. Everything in the compartment was decorated in a modern style, and he enjoyed looking out the window, behind which flashed colorful summer landscapes. All the unpleasant things had faded into the background, and he no longer cared about his work at the clinic or his frantic wife. It was time for lunch. The man grabbed his jacket and opened the compartment door. At that time, a young woman was just passing by. It was easy to guess from her figure that she was pregnant. With a doctor's experienced eye, he determined that the lady was about to give birth. He had always been against any traveling of pregnant women in the last month. That's why even now, when he saw the negligent mother, he couldn't help himself and said loudly, "But where, tell me, will she go when she is going to give birth any day now?" That mom's went. The sun was flooding the carriage of the fast train, so the doctor did not immediately see the woman's face. She was the first to recognize it. "Doctor, what meeting?" "Oh my goodness, I was going to visit my family." "And you are?" Stephen was a little confused. The journalist Evelyn was nothing like the shy girl in the ridiculous blouse he interviewed. "I have to check on someone too, and I just want to get away. I'm tired of work." "I'm tired too. You know, I've been sent all the time to places where I can't go. And everyone's demanding. Evelyn, it's so annoying that I was so happy to be pregnant. By the way, about your situation, Shouldn't you be hitting the road? Oh, doctor, it's not a plane, it's a train. Nothing's going to happen to me. Allow me an indiscreet question. Where's your husband? Kevin. Is he working? He hasn't been released. And you shouldn't have risked it. Stephen thought to himself. Kindergarten, by God. Out loud. He said, if memory serves me correctly. Evelyn. Aha. You're trying to walk less. When's your due date? Oh, it's still 2 weeks away. The doctor didn't say anything to the girl, but thought to himself it would be good if the contractions started in a couple of days, not sooner. The man went to a restaurant, where he had a wonderful lunch. He was accompanied by a doctor he knew, with whom they had crossed paths several times at health meetings. They drank a glass of good wine and talked about the problems of modern medicine. When the interlocutor learned that at the moment Stephen is out of work, he even rejoiced. Colleague, you have God sent me. We're short-staffed. You could say we're suffocating. There's not a single competent specialist in the maternity ward. Here's my card. I'll be waiting for your call. After dinner, Stephen went to his car, which was at the head of the train, and Stephen went to his own. But on the way to his carriage, he heard the frightened shout of the conductor. Gentlemen, comrades, there is a doctor among you. A woman giving birth to a doctor rushed forward to the compartment the conductor was pointing to. Are you a doctor? Let me through. You know, there's something wrong. I've delivered babies once before, but there's something wrong with this girl. Something wrong. Don't yell at me. She seems conscious, but she's not responding or answering questions. She's not even screaming. Everybody screams during labor. I know. She's not screaming. Shouldn't we tell the trainmaster? Yes, absolutely. Tell them to stop the train at the nearest station and have an ambulance there. The conductor was about to run, but the doctor stopped her. One more thing, please. There's a colleague of mine in the third car. Could you please call him? Because it's going to be difficult to manage alone. Of course, doctor. We have a satellite link. We'll be in touch in a moment. At almost 2 o'clock, the doctor stayed with the girl. A friend of Stephen said, and she should be drained. I'm afraid we're gonna lose our mom. Colleague, we'll try to make it on our own, especially soon the station. The passengers were excitedly discussing this unusual incident. Some gave examples from their own lives. Finally, there was a loud scream, and everyone shouted hooray. A man was born. The tired doctors also rejoiced at the successful resolution of the situation. Stephen asked the happy mother, "Do you even have diapers and clothes for the baby?" Yes, powerless from the excitement, but smiling. No, I didn't bring anything. I was told by the counselor that it's 2 more weeks. The conductor found a way out. I have sterile diapers and diapers in my stash, just in case. Let's get you over here, quick. The doctor started rubbing the baby's body and noticed a small birthmark on his right breast. His eyes immediately went black. Colleague, what's wrong? A doctor he knew was offering him a bribe. Wait, it happens. It's probably the pressure from the stress. Well, maybe. Stephen looked at the baby and couldn't believe it was happening to him. And with a loud cry, the newborn broadcast to the world that there was one more person on the planet. Good value for the price, he scores 8.95. Such a high estimate was given to the newborn by Starepo's colleague, who had no idea what was going on in his heart. Half an hour later, the train stopped at the station. The carriage was immediately entered by doctors. On the platform, Stephen saw the ambulance and resolutely took his jacket from a hanger. He would reach it later, but now he would get off with Evelyn. In such a backwater, it was unknown whether there were any good doctors either. Evelyn was already lying on the stretcher. The girl, a nurse, wraps the baby carefully. Oh, Stephen, I didn't thank you, but now you have. You don't know how grateful I am. I'm such a fool. But you could have waited. I didn't. I thought once the baby's born, I won't be able to get to my mom for a long time. So I thought I'd go away for a few days. Yes, your behavior is completely irresponsible. Evelyn smiled weakly. Every time you and I meet, you read me like a child. Stephen thought about the fact that Evelyn had just told the real truth. Well, that's just the way it is. He needs to find out what's even going on. The birthmark is too object to be a mere coincidence. Stephen tried to remember if his family had ever talked about Kamyshin. And the more he thought, the more he realized that only in connection with his work. On the other hand, Evelyn and her relatives could have come to this town from somewhere else entirely. Do you get off at this station? The young mother's voice brought him back to reality. Yes, I'm afraid you may not get the help you need here. Those eyes didn't get huge. So you're here for me, are you? Well, you could say it's for my peace of mind. I'm the one who delivered the baby, so I need to make sure you're okay. Thank you so much. I've already called my husband, and he'll be here tonight. Oh, how he screamed. He was so scared. He was right to be. How could he even let you go? Evelyn smiled. He wouldn't let go. He was totally against it. But you don't listen to anyone. Why not? I do. Sometimes he laughed. And Evelyn is very interesting and funny. The orderlies and took up the stretcher. Stephen picked up his suitcase and Evelyn's things. There was no maternity hospital in this godforsaken place, just a small wooden hospital with a children's ward. I'm sorry, doctor. There was an old woman looking at him. She reminded him of the very doctor's assistant who had once met his young doctor in Kamyshin. Yes, I'm a doctor. Who can I talk to? Well, Rick's at the clinic right now. He'll be here soon. What, he's a receptionist and works here at the same time. But since he's the only one here, we're just waiting for his son to finish school, God willing. Then we'll have a strong 2 doctors. Stephen chuckled involuntarily. Whole 2. It's not just 1, Rick. I'll go to the labor and delivery room, but go put on the booties. The woman handed him the booties. It was obvious he wasn't their first host. Stephen, gritting his teeth. What's the matter? Evelyn was lying by the window, which was open. There was no one else in the room. He silently put the things that no one in the hospital even paid attention to, and rolled the bed with the young mom farther away. The girl looked at him embarrassed. You take care of me like that? I'm not even comfortable. Stop it. You don't need to think about anything at all right now. Just yourself and the baby. What are you going to name it? We haven't even thought about it yet. When my husband gets here, we'll decide. He heard some noise in the corridor, thought it was Rick, and he was not mistaken. The door swung open. But who do we have here? Rick was exactly as he had imagined. Stephen, short, with close-cropped hair and very lively eyes. And you must be the metropolitan doctor who delivered the baby. That's right. Well, Nanochka will take the tests now, and we can have a chat. They went out into the corridor. The nurse's station was empty. Somewhere else. We don't have any sick people here, just someone who refuses to go to the city hospital. But don't worry, we have everything we need. Rick talked himself through the ward doors, opening them one by one, to find the thread. Finally, in one of the rooms, he saw her. Nana, the girl, who had been reading the book with rapt attention, flinched. That Rick, he so seemed to tease her that Stephen involuntarily smiled. Where are you supposed to be? But Rick, she ran out of breath when she saw that the doctor was not alone. Quickly, she jumped up and headed for the post. They followed. So in the 6th room of a woman in labor with a baby answer head to get everything done and get diapers, skates. You don't have to. I'm going now. I'll buy everything. And I think tomorrow we can already transport them to the city. Well, the mom, obviously. It's a little early for the baby. I'm gonna get changed and go for a checkup. Are you coming with me? If it's okay, yes. Surprisingly, both Evelyn and the baby were doing well. Stephen smiled, but when her husband would arrive, she didn't answer. Probably only by evening, he decided to pick up his mom. That's a detour of almost 100 kilometers. Stephen's heart sank. That evening, he could probably find out where the child got such an object birthmark. I wonder if it's on her husband's line or Evelyn's. So far, he had no idea how he was going to do it, what questions to ask. He still went to the store. Strangely enough, there were two in the village, and in one of them he was able to buy almost everything he needed. Evelyn shook her hands when she saw what he had brought. "Oh, Kevin, everything is lucky. You tell me, how much do I owe? I have money. I'll pay it all back later. Now think about milk and feeding your baby." Toward evening, Rick invited Stephen into his office. "You've been on your feet all day. Let's go get something to eat." They sat down at the resident's desk. Stephen looked around. "It feels like you live here." Rick laughed. "You're almost right. As you can imagine, I'm the only doctor here. It's a bit of a grind. When my son lived at home with me, at least I had something to do. Now he's away at school, so I can devote all my time to my work. Pardon my indiscretion, but what about your wife?" "Valichka, no, not for more than 10 years. It's just the way it is. I treat people. I couldn't cure my wife." "Sorry, nothing." They had just had time to eat dinner when Nina came knocking. "Your woman in labor is in there. She's out of her mind." Stephen and Rick jumped out of their seats. They flew into the room just as Evelyn was trying to wrap the baby in a blanket. She was barely on her feet, sobbing, but she carried the baby anyway. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" Stephen took the boy from her. Evelyn looked at him with mad eyes. I need, you know. There's Kevin and Mommy. They've been in an accident." Stephen shivered. "How do you know?" "I just got a call." "Okay, don't panic. You don't know who's hurt or how badly. We need to find out first. Where are you and the baby going? What can you do for them?" "Just the baby. And you won't get far on your own." Rick was about to say something, but Nina came into the room. "Rick, they'd brought 2 people in from the accident. They said they were taking them closer to the village immediately." Kevin's mom. Rick looked at Stephen. "Can you give me a hand?" "Sure." He turned to Evelyn. "Listen to me carefully. Evelyn, we'll do whatever we need to do, but please stay in the room with the baby so we don't have to worry about you. Only if we don't have to be distracted can we help your family." "That's understood." Evelyn nodded. Rick rushed out of the room, throwing on the way. Nina Stephen ran after me. Evelyn's husband wasn't hurt very badly. After a cursory examination, it was clear that he had a couple of fractures and a few cuts that needed stitches. Nina escorted Stephen and Kevin into the examination room, where Stephen took over. He didn't know what was wrong with the woman because Rick and the EMT had rushed her somewhere down the hall. Kevin, writhing in pain, asked, "Tell me, my wife, how is she? Is she with you? She gave birth on the train." "Don't worry, Evelyn's fine." "What are you in for now? Can you talk to her?" "No, I'm not going." Stephen looked at the young man in surprise. "Why is that?" "What am I gonna tell her? I killed your mom. My wife's mom was riding with me. Who knows what happened to the steering wheel? It just started spinning freely at one point. No action on the wheels. But her mom's alive. Why are you burying her before her time? She's very hurt. I saw it. A landmine came through the door. Stephen, I'm asking you to come here urgently. I'll finish up here. There's a sign at the very end of the hall. Block." Kevin gave a startled gasp, and Stephen rushed down the hall. Rick was administering an IV to a woman. "Stephen, I don't know what to do. The damage was mostly to the abdomen. It's a huge loss. But that's not even the worst part. Something's damaged. She keeps losing blood. I've already contacted the city hospital, and they're sending a crash cart. But it'll be here in about 3 hours, at the earliest. They're bringing blood, and they're bringing a surgeon and a team. Even if they make it, which I highly doubt, we can't take her anyway. She'll die on the way. What are your thoughts?" "No thoughts. 10, 15 years ago, I would have said we should operate. There are no conditions, but human life now, I understand perfectly well that we can't do anything in such conditions without the right equipment." Stephen began to examine the woman. "Rick, I think we should try it. And then he hesitated. He looked at the woman's face. Vanessa. Rick turned to him in surprise. Do you two know each other? And then something clicked in Stephen's head, and everything fell into place. Vanessa Evelyn, the baby with the birthmark. No, it can't be. It can't be. Stephen, there's nothing wrong with you. He looked at Rick with crazy eyes. Is there anyone else we can call for help? Our nurse is old, but she's been an operating room nurse for years. Ninochka is inexperienced, but she's a good thinker. And 2 nurses who also work here. Page everyone. Let's get ready for surgery. Rick stood there for a second, looking at Strhepo. Are you sure? Yeah. We need to find the source of the bleeding. Then maybe they'll come in from the city. Rick jumped out of the office. Out of the hallway, his voice came out. Quickly, we're gonna get everybody into surgery right away. Stephen stood looking at Vanessa. How many years? It was over 20. Vanessa's face was pale, but he could still see that the years had not changed her much. Rick returned and Stephen went to change. In the hallway, he met a startled Evelyn. Tell me, how's Mom? He looked at the girl, then took her hand. I'm not going to lie to you. It's pretty bad. There's a car on its way to us from town, but they might just not make it in time. Down the hallway toward them, Kevin was hobbling toward them. Evelyn. She turned around, threw herself into a hug. Kevin, do something, please. He stroked her hair and looked at Stephen in silence. Vanessa's O positive needs blood. I'm AB positive. Kevin, like in high school, raised his hand. You can take it. I can take anything. Just save her. Evelyn cried, then raised her eyes to Stephen. How do you know what kind of blood Mommy has? Kevin looked at him too. And how do you know what her name is? I didn't tell you. Did you leave your papers in the car? Stephen sighed. We knew her once. Evelyn suddenly stopped crying. How long ago was that? A long time ago, over 20 years ago. Evelyn, I'll be sure to answer all your questions. But then Kevin followed me. Rick wasn't much. 1. And I called my colleagues in the area. He'll be in touch if he has any tips. Great. Let's get started. About 5 minutes after the operation began, 2 more girls appeared next to them. The assistant had already laid out the tools. Now Stephen would not have recognized this elderly woman with her concentrated face, the very almost grandmother who met him. After an hour and a half, they moved away from the table. Rick looked at everyone. Thank you, colleagues. What we have all accomplished today is a true miracle. Now we just have to wait. Stephen stepped out into the hallway. He realized that he had to go and talk to Evelyn. Kevin was taken to her room. The conversation would probably not be very pleasant, but it could not be avoided. He pulled off his cap, pushed open the door of the room. Evelyn immediately jumped up. Mom's alive. I think everything will be all right now. The colleagues from the city will be here soon. Next to Kevin on the bed was a baby boy. The man looked at him fondly, almost unblinking. But when he heard Stephen, he raised himself up on one elbow. Thank you, doctor, but I wasn't the only one there. Rick, what a god. It amazes me how many things one man can do in this town. A stomach doctor would never treat a cold. He sat down on the bed. Evelyn looked at him without looking away. That's not all you wanted to tell us. He nodded. Then he looked up at Evelyn. Evelyn, what blood type are you? Third negative. Yeah. How do you know? I'm the same. She sat down next to him and looked confusedly at her hands, then at her husband. Kevin sat down too. Am I to understand correctly that you are now going to tell us that Evelyn is your daughter? Stephen shrugged his shoulders. Apparently, yes. Really, I didn't know anything myself. I had all sorts of thoughts when I took in the big boy. He has the same birthmark as all the men in our line. But I didn't even think in that direction. Was going to find out, of course, through whom that birthmark came, through Evelyn or through Kevin. Then Vanessa saw it. Evelyn stood up, and I always knew my daddy was Robert. I don't think you're right. It's just some kind of coincidence. Mom's gonna wake up and find out. Look at this. Kevin carefully turned the baby around with one hand that wasn't very comfortable, so Evelyn rushed over to help him. He was the one who was pointing at a birthmark of a very unusual shape. Stephen silently unbuttoned his shirt and showed the exact same one, only bigger. Evelyn was powerless. Sank down on the bed. What is it? Daddy loved me. I never would have guessed. He did. She looked up at Stephen. Daddy died when I was 15. There was silence in the room. Stephen stood up. He could feel how tired he was. There just wasn't any energy left. There was a murmur in the hallway. He breathed a sigh of relief. Here came help. Vanessa had regained consciousness already in the car. It was decided to drive her in the morning. Another car was to come for Kevin and Evelyn with the baby. Stephen made the decision to go with Vanessa. He did not immediately decide after Evelyn asked, "You are not going to leave Mommy now. You saved her. Stick around at least until she's safe, sure. Don't worry, Evelyn. I'll be right here." He pulled the girl against him on some impulse, eyes shielding her. He only now suddenly realized that he had a daughter. He had a grandson, but no family. No one needs him. Tanya has everyone beaten, weak and sick, but all together. And he's still alone. Vanessa accused everything around her with a cloudy look, then focused her gaze on him. "You." He barely heard what she said, wanted to answer. Vanessa closed her eyes again. Kamishin met them with rain. Stephen thought that they had basically swapped an awl for a soap. As far as he remembered, the medicine here was also lame. But the car went down some unfamiliar street. Finally, it stopped in front of a beautiful new building and the doors opened. "Vanessa, what the hell is this?" Stephen watched in amazement as the entire staff of the new hospital clustered around Vanessa. He approached the driver. It felt like everyone knew her. The driver grinned. How could they not when she's the head doctor? As head doctor, she's the one who got this hospital from the administration. The building was supposed to be the new home of the officials, so she made it happen. Her daughter was attracted by that journalist or someone else on TV. After the reports, the officials came here and gave the building to them and brought all the necessary equipment. No one knew Vanessa was hurt. She would have been carried out in their arms. That's weird. Evelyn didn't say anything about the mom being the chief of medicine. Maybe it would have been quicker. Vanessa never takes advantage of her position and forbids everyone. She says when a person moves into the category of patient, they become just a sick person, not a boss or a pipe cleaner. Stephen was confused and depressed. That's the interesting thing about life. It just loves to put people in a dead end. For example, take him back then. Many years ago, he had done an ugly, mean thing, but it was because life had dealt with him that way. Yes, he had to go away alone, because he knew perfectly well that Vanessa would become his ballast. But what if he wanted to accomplish something? He grinned bitterly. He had. At that age, back to where he'd started. So he wouldn't be needed in this hospital, because the saints would be looked after like queens. Then who would want him? The answer was self-evident. No one wanted him at all. He was sure that Evelyn didn't want to see him much either. He decided to get a hotel room, sleep, wash up, then say goodbye to everyone and go. Go where? Probably to Moscow. Something must be done about the dissolution of the marriage. Something must be done about housing. Stephen was sure that Jean would not want to part with a single meter of their housing so easily. But nothing he will fight. Especially now there is someone to fight for. The next day, he found out that Evelyn was being discharged this afternoon, and Kevin called him. "Stephen, I don't know what your relationship with Evelyn will be, but you're the reason my son was born. So if you'd like to come down to the local maternity hospital at 200 hours. Thanks, Kevin. I'll be there. You tell me, where can I find a decent baby store in town? The mall on Lennon. I'll be there. I'll definitely be there." And Kevin said, "And also, Evelyn, I have kind and fair. You don't think she'll hate you." "Thank you, Kevin. You're not a very lucky man. He got his hopes up, called a cab, and rushed to the baby store. He thought long and hard about what to buy. He bought a stroller. He had no idea whether they already had one or not. I figured I'd get two, if anything. Evelyn greeted him with a smile. Hello. I didn't know you were coming. Well, how could I not? Stephen held out the flowers to Evelyn and looked inside the bag. Can I hold them? Help with Kevin's hand. Sure. How many small children has he held? 1,000, maybe more. But now that he had this little living lump in his arms, he wanted to cry. He could hardly contain himself. Not for long, though. My husband and I have decided to name our son Stephen. If it hadn't been for you. That's it. I can't hold back the tears now. Old age, I guess. He walked the happy parents home and headed to the hospital to see Vanessa. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he realized it couldn't be like before. Vanessa would be absolutely right to chase him away and forbid Evelyn from associating with him. Well then, he would leave, but he would still help both his grandson and his daughter. The girl who escorted him to the ward on the way told him that Vanessa Grigorievna is much better. She is already talking. That's good. The girl suddenly stopped. It was you who saved her. No, we all did it together. Everyone who works at the hospital, in that village. Vanessa turned her head at once. Her eyes widened. Stephen closed the door of the room. He came over and sat down on a chair. Hello, Vanessa. Hello, Stephen. So I wasn't dreaming about you. You're the doctor from the capital who saved me. Perhaps I should thank you. You don't have to. It's the least I could do for you. Vanessa, why didn't you tell me? You didn't tell me I didn't understand you. You didn't tell me about Evelyn. So you guessed. But it wasn't hard, considering I delivered the baby and saw the birthmark right away. So there you go. I wanted to tell you. I thought long and hard. I didn't know if you needed that information. But then I decided you had a right to know. I went to Moscow. It wasn't hard to find you. Only that day you had a wedding. I saw you, stood there and left, determined to forget you forever. Robert was waiting for me here, and I told him everything. All he said was he wished he killed you. Didn't kill you then. Stephen grinned. A pity indeed. What is it now? Nothing. Nothing's changed. Evelyn thinks of Robert as her father. Let's keep it that way. Evelyn knows everything. I told her. Vanessa closed her eyes. Why are you going back to Moscow? Why do you have to stir things up now? Stephen got up and walked to the fire. For some reason, I decided I wanted to. There's nothing keeping me there. I'm divorcing my wife. I don't have a job there anymore. I worked at my father-in-law's clinic. So one thing follows from another. I should have stayed then. But maybe it's not too late now. She looked at him closely. You're kidding. No. What jokes? I've realized a lot in these few days I've been here. That's when I gave up everything to go after a better life, leaving you alone. What's the result? Now I got nothing again. No position of disrespect, no family you left behind. And now every man in this town speaks your name with a kind of reverence. You have a daughter and now a grandson. You have everything. I'm not jealous. I mean, it's the right thing to do. You earned it all. And I got what I deserve. Vanessa was silent. He stood for a moment, then moved toward the door. Okay. I'm sorry. Of course you're right. You don't want me to let you in my face. You're absolutely right. It's a good thing I didn't help, didn't raise, and got a grown daughter right away. It would have been too easy. I'll leave tomorrow. I'm sorry. He grabbed the doorknob and heard it. I have a position at the hospital as head of the maternity ward. The current head has been asking for a well-deserved retirement for a year, and I have no one to replace him. He froze, then turned around. Vanessa, you're sure you won't regret your offer? She grinned weakly. Of course I will. Stephen set to work with enthusiasm. At first, for now, all the issues with the division of property. He was given an apartment not far from the hospital. The rent was a pittance. The apartment was quite small, but it was quite decent inside. The first day, he contacted a lawyer he knew in Moscow and told him to start divorce proceedings. "Your wife never worked." "No, I see where you're going with this. We'll divide everything according to our conscience, but you have to offer her to buy my share because I'm not going back." "Oh yeah, so where does the best doctor in the world live now?" Stephen laughed. "Where she used to send me and my dad all the time." Everyone on the ward looked at him with a kind of morbid curiosity. He knew exactly why. Not only was he not a local from the capital, but as it turned out, he was an acquaintance of their head doctor. And that was interesting, considering that they were almost the same age. Stephen visited Vanessa every day, under the pretense of talking about work. They both knew that work had nothing to do with it, but they were careful to pretend that it did. After each shift, Stephen stopped by Evelyn's house. She was genuinely happy to see him. And Kevin smiled and said that as soon as his arm was healed, he would take Stephen fishing. Everything was rolling along, but there was still something unfinished in the air. When Vanessa is discharged, everything will fall into place. But he didn't think they could continue to communicate like this. Every day more and more he realized one thing could always be considered lost, and only the time spent next to Vanessa was bright and somehow real. A month passed, and Vanessa, finally, she left the hospital with her own feet and breathed a full breath. God, it felt good. I never understood why patients disliked hospitalization so much. Now I realized Stephen was standing a little apart. He didn't want to disturb them. Evelyn hugged her mother and led her to the car. He sighed. How lucky is it to have someone to hug like that? Stephen walked toward the hospital, but he heard, "Dad, aren't you with us?" He froze. Hearing those words, he slowly turned around. No, there was no mistake. Except for them, there was almost no one on the street. Tunis looked at him and smiled. "Let's go." I set the table. Kevin's mom is babysitting Stephen, so we have to hurry, because our son has a temper. And he looked at Vanessa. If she wasn't happy, he'd say no. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable. But Vanessa looked at him calmly, even as if affectionately. "I'm going, of course I'm going. I just thought you wanted your family." He rushed toward them. "Dick." The man even stumbled. Only one man had such a nasty voice. "Jean, hadn't you forgotten your wife?" She slammed the door of the expensive car and moved toward them. "Stephen, stop freaking out. We've all been a little overreacting, both Dad and you. But face it, you were wrong first. Dad is willing to take you back if you apologize for what you said." He saw Vanessa's face change. "She's a purse. But we won't get in your way," and moved toward the car. Evelyn stood for a moment and followed her mother. Stephen turned to Jean. "Why did you come here?" "I don't understand. We've decided everything. I honored your wish and went back there. Where do you think I belong?" "Stephen, enough already. Are you really ready to sacrifice a normal life for all this?" Jean made a vague gesture with her hand. Stephen suddenly calmed down. He followed Kevin's car with his eyes. What didn't escape Jean? And I did not understand. "Have you found yourself a provincial seagull already here?" She laughed. "But you surprised me. I thought you were already incapable of anything. But you're still capable of conquering someone. Well, maybe you're willing to give up everything for some countrywoman." He came right up to Jean. "Did you get here on time?" "No, really, if I didn't look at you now, at your behavior, I wouldn't have realized what a worthless life I've lived. Tell me, Jean, why do you live? You're of no use to anyone. You leave no one behind. There's a man. But if you take him out of the world, no one will notice. You're that kind of person. Jean, a parasite." The woman even choked with indignation. "Who the hell are you?" "My dad won't let you work here." Stephen laughed. "You just don't browbeat, not out of anger." He almost ran down the sidewalk. Now he knew exactly what he had to do. Somewhere nearby, he saw a convenience store, just what he needed right now. Vanessa was sitting at the table, picking at her plate with her fork. "Mom, "You're not eating anything." "I don't feel like it, daughter." She really didn't feel like it. The only thing she wanted to do right now was to curl up in her pillow and sob like what? How could she fall back in love with someone who'd done that to her? Her brain was trying to tell her that she probably never stopped loving him. But Vanessa didn't want to hear those thoughts. Kevin stood up. "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. That's all. Look, he won't go with her. I don't know him that much, but he seemed like a normal guy to me." Vanessa grinned at Kevin. "What's your point? What are they getting at? What do you think, Vanessa, that we don't see anything, don't understand anything? Why did you leave them there? You could have waited. So he thinks we've all abandoned him, and no one wants him here." Evelyn looked at her mother. She thought so too, but she didn't say anything. Vanessa sighed. "The most important thing is whether he needs us, and that can only be decided by him, not his wife. We can't help him with that." She got up. "I'm going to lie down. I'm tired." Vanessa didn't make it to her room before the doorbell rang. Who could it be? "Kevin, open up. Maybe someone's here to see you." Kevin shrugged. Who could be here to see them if they lived in another city, and all their friends are there? He opened the door and smiled broadly. "I knew you'd come." "Vanessa." "Where?" "In the room." Stephen was barely visible behind the huge bouquet of roses. He quickly threw off his jacket and moved into the room. Kevin followed him. Vanessa looked at him in surprise. He handed her the flowers. She took the bouquet out of surprise and then knelt down and handed Vanessa the box with the ring. "Vanessa, I should have done this years ago, but I was cowardly. I acted like a pig and not a man. I'm asking if you can. I'm sorry if you can't. I'm prepared to take reproach from you for the rest of my life. But I'm begging you, marry me. I'm not divorced yet, but it's only a matter of time. I can't do it without you. I've been thinking that only the time we've been together has any meaning at all." Vanessa looked at Stephen, confused and surprised at the same time. She certainly realized that he felt something for her, but to give her a ring like that without a second thought. "But, Mom, how many times? You love him. We can see that." Evelyn couldn't help herself, and as if to confirm her words, little Stephen, who was being held by Kevin, farted loudly. Yes, so that it was distinct. "Aha!" They laughed. Stephen held on the longest, but after a minute he was laughing with everyone else. Vanessa, wiping away the tears that had come from laughter or something else, said to wash the dishes one at a time. Stephen grinned, ready to take on that responsibility completely. Vanessa immediately replied, "Don't let anyone hold your tongue." He laughed and was finally able to pull Vanessa against him. He could feel her heart pounding, or maybe it was pounding with his heart. It didn't matter. They were still beating in unison.